Hey there, comic book fans. I am live, and I'm the only one here right now at the beginning. Paulo should be here in about 15 minutes. Wilson's got a 6 o'clock meeting, and he should be here whenever that's done. I don't think it's usually more than half an hour. So, meanwhile, you just got me to talk some comics with you and whatever else I can get up to here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to show you some dice because I've got a big deck. If you've never followed me on Instagram, which you can find the link at jaredosborne.com, I post pictures of dice color compositions I make. And I also I got some dice. I got two new, here we go. Got 2 new containers of dice this week. Got them off of eBay. You can get a lot of stuff off of eBay. Dice is one of the things. They're all Chessex dice too. There's the brand. I think they make most of the dice, or at least the pretty dice in the world. What do we got here? Frosted blue and white. Frosted is one of my favorite color dice. Of course, you open it up, there's 12 6-sided in here. There we go. Let's see if we can see that little bit of frosting on them that makes it a little whitish. There's some dice for you. One of the ones I got. And what's the other one? Mosaic yellow in the festive variety. These are kind of rainbowish. There's a lot of colors in there. But this is, besides comic books, one of the things, I guess it's now officially a collection. I mean, they all fit in one. I mean, there's like, I have nearly 1,000 dice, but 1,000 dice don't take up that much room. They don't take up nearly as much room as 1,000 comic books. And for the first time last weekend, I made a spreadsheet of all my dice, just so I could know which ones I have at a glance, because all these Chessex dice, as you can see there, have a number on them. That one's 27606. Because sometimes I'd go on eBay or maybe Amazon to look for dice that I might have or not have, and I would like, do I have that one? Because I don't. I'm usually not wrong. I only got it wrong once, and that was because the color in the picture was way off than the color of the actual dice. So I only bought I think I bought like 50 of these sets over 20 years. I only bought the same one twice, but only once did I buy the same one twice. But now that I've got a spreadsheet, I can just look at that and tell which ones I have. But meanwhile, it was a slow week for me at the comic shop this week. Only got 4 comics. And what's strange is, I don't know what's going on with my comic shop and 8 Billion Genies, but I'm pretty darn sure 8 Billion Genies was out this week because I saw number 3 was out this week because I saw other people with it, and it's on my pull list, but it didn't make it into my shop at all this week. And 8 Billion Genies number 2 was also 2 weeks late at my shop. I'm like, what is it with that book? And I don't even think they're getting shorted on it. I think I don't know what it is. That comic can be late 2 issues in a row is very strange. But like I said, I was supposed to get 8 Billion Genies number 3 this week, but it didn't arrive at my shop. Matter of fact, I only had 1 comic on my pull list this week, but I pulled 3 off the shelf. But they didn't even get this week's indies in, besides the one on my pull list. They didn't even get them all out yet because they were late coming in. I don't know. So, but that was okay because there was stuff I wanted from last week that I didn't get because I had a full pull list last week. So I got to pick a few things off the shelf. That's always good. I'll be showing them tonight once the guys get here in a few minutes. But meanwhile, comic shop news. You know what's weird? I just realized about this. I like this cover, by the way. Blink. I think it's an Aftershock comic. But a new one, Blink. Oh no, it's Only Press. Pardon me. But it just reminded me that though I've been buying those Aftershock one-shots, the graphic novels when they come out, I've been steering away from the Aftershock series. And I realized today that it was because they were the first ones to go to $5 an issue. 8 Billion Genies is a great issue 3. Yeah, I don't know why my shop didn't get it in. My shop got an issue 2 weeks late, and now it looks like it's getting an issue 3 late too. I'm like, what is up with my shop and that comic? I'm not sure. But I realized I haven't been buying many Aftershock comics because they were the first company to go to $5 an issue. And especially, at first, it was just their first issues that were $5. Not that I was buying a ton of Aftershock comics in a while. But the $5 first issue price, scared me off from trying stuff. I realize now that, I have tried other first issues for $5 since then, since lots of small press companies have gone to $5 first issues. That is weird that I'm still not buying much. Those $5 Aftershock first issues still scare me away because there was one last week. I can't remember the name of it, but it had a nice cover on it, and it looked. But that I just didn't want to try it for $5. That's all it comes down to. It's like $5 really seems to put me off from trying things. $4 first issue, okay, I'll give it a try. Even though the $5 comics I get from my shop with a 10% discount, so I'm really getting them for $4.50. But still, it's just kind of like, I don't know how many $5 first issues I want to try. But I don't think Oni Press is putting out a lot of books. I don't know if they have a price on. Oh, this Blink #1 is a $3.99 comic for July 27th release. But I don't see many Oni Press books at my comic shop, just on the stands. And I don't know how many they put out. I think most of the Oni Press stuff I've seen. I'm not quite on my own. Paulo should be showing up at 6:15. And Wilson should also be showing up. His 7:00 meeting that he usually has got moved to 6. So he'll be showing up whenever that meeting's over, 6:30 or so. But I should have some people in effect. I should have Paulo in 7 minutes. We'll see. Yeah, 1 and 2 were screwed up here too. All comics out a week apart here. Oh, okay. I was reading is the only Image book going back to reprint. I think it's screwed up everywhere. Release it might, like I said, I don't know why 2 and 3 made it to my shop 2 weeks late. It's kind of crazy. That's 8 Billion Genies we're talking about. Should have been out this week. Didn't make it to mine, and I can tell too because what's weird is every week with my comic shop, I get an email that tells me what's coming that week for me. And occasionally something gets shorted. It's still on my email saying it's coming in, but then when I go in, they're like, we didn't get it in, it's shorted. With 8 Billion Genies, it wasn't even in my email saying it's coming in this week. And issue 2 wasn't in my email saying it's coming in that week, but it was in 2 weeks later when it actually came in. Oni Press fired a bunch of people the other day, didn't they? Whoa. Sounds like there have been issues there. Paying royalties late or not at all. I did not hear that. Good evening, Mind the Comics. My one friend who works for not a comic book publisher, but a regular publisher in Manhattan, a book publisher, 140 people got laid off from I forget which book publisher it was, on yesterday. It's like, whoa, that's a lot of people to get laid off all at once. I think it's a venture capitalist thing. Someone bought them. So, of course, after your company gets bought, they lay off lots of people. So I was sad to hear she lost her job. She was an editor, I think, of children's books. But I was like, wow, 140 people in one clip got laid off from that publisher. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Yeah, like I said, I don't see much Oni. I didn't know Oni Press lead people. How many people does Oni Press even have working for them? Can't be that many. Because I don't see a ton of books that they put out. But here's a new one coming out from Oni Press, Blink. I think that's the same thing with Oni as well. I haven't read a lot about it, so I could. Wasn't Oni Press? Didn't like Kevin Smith used to own that or something? It seems Oni is dropping all creator-owned comics. Oh, okay. Everybody wants that Hollywood money now. Everybody's chasing that Hollywood money, I imagine. So, I just got an email from something. Let's see. Hey, Jared, can I get a white? Yeah, we'll worry about that later. What did I just read? Skybound picked up the G.I. Joe and Transformers license. I found that a bit surprising. Robert Kirkman's imprint on Image, Skybound, because who was it? IDW lost the license to G.I. Joe and Transformers, and Skybound got it from them. I was like, I can't figure out why Skybound would want to publish G.I. Joe and Transformers. Maybe they're favorites of Kirkman. I don't know. But I just heard that this week, and I did not know that. I don't even know what comics Oni Press prints these days. I have not seen much from Oni in a while. Like I said, I thought when they first started many, many years ago, they were a Kevin Smith imprint, but I haven't heard that in ages. But 8 Billion G's North, that was good. Heard Amazon wants to make it into a show. That's right. Kaiju Max, that's an Oni Press, but that just ended too. Season 6 of Kaiju Max was the last season, so there's no more Kaiju Max. But yeah, I was buying that, and that was an Oni Press book. So that was they also have the Luan Forge imprint as well. I don't know that imprint at all. Lion Forge. Oh, that's right. That's like I think Chris Geruso did some work for Lion Forge. One of his series came out from that. I forget which. The last one he did. I don't remember the name of it. With that stretch, extraterrestrial or something, alien, something with that alien guy that came out from Lion Forge. I think that Lion Forge might be their kids line. I cannot remember. It's been a while since, like it's been a while since I've seen Oni Press stuff. They did the Jay and Silent Bob stuff in the 90s. I picked up that from Oni Press. Yeah, I think it's more YA stuff. YA is the gold rush for comics these days. That's where everyone thinks they're going to make their fortune. And there's a few fortunes to be made, but most of it not. Most of it not a fortune. Let's see what else is in the comic shop news besides Blink. While we wait for Paulo to show up. I like this Mike Allred Batman for the Batman Audio Adventures, but I have no idea what it is. That's a pretty cool Mike Allred Batman, though. Is that a comic? That's in here somewhere. Batman 120, Batman the Audio Adventures. Oh, it's a podcast. There's a Batman podcast. Picking up right after the season finale of the award-winning podcast, Batman the Audio Adventures continues the saga. I guess it's a comic book. Dennis McNicholas, Anthony Marquez, and Jay Bone. I guess it's a comic book based on a Batman podcast. How insane is that? I had no idea there was a Batman podcast. And why would you want to make it? I guess that's just more Batman material. That's all. Need more Batman material. Batgirls. There's some more Batman material. Hello, I just want to know if I'm the only one who thinks that older comics are better in terms of art and story. No, I don't think older. I go to the comic shop every week and buy new comics, but I don't buy Marvel and DC. There are so many good comics out there these days, I can't even keep up with them. But I don't buy Marvel and DC comics because I don't expect the comics I liked as a kid to be the same comics I buy as an adult, and they're not. I like the comics from the 60s and 70s that I read as a kid, but I'd much rather read the stuff that's coming out today, as long as I like it. I mean, there's such a bigger variety, and there's such a bigger variety of comics, and comics aimed at me rather than a 14-year-old getting out of hand. Yeah, I don't even know what that means. Was part of an art thing today, and the gallery next door had a sale, so I picked up The Great Gatsby for $1 on your recommendation of everything Gatsby. Oh, Great Gatsby for $1 is well worth it. I have been very into Gatsby, as you know, and making my own Gatsby book. So, you know what? I don't know if it's a troll or just, there's a lot of people who want comics to be, that they want to be 10 to 14 again. They want that magic of when they were 12 years old picking up Spider-Man. And it's just not going to happen again. That's their comic sweet spot. And they wish they could recapture it. I think that's all that is. There's some, but it was a comic sweet spot for me too. That's me. I like the old stuff. Yeah. But for me, I moved on from that sweet. I'm okay with leaving that 60s and 70s stuff behind. I'm okay with that. I mean, I can go back and read it anytime I want. You're part of the newer generation. Well, one thing is, if I was starting out reading comics right now today, I might think comics from the 60s and 70s are easier to get into because if you're starting out reading comics today and you're reading Marvel and DC, especially, they can be a little impenetrable, and even indie stuff, because I think one of the things is that we don't talk about enough. Visual storytelling in comics is ahead of a lot of the audience. Like I've heard people say over the years, I want to read a comic, but I don't know what when they open a comic, they don't know what balloon to read next. And what it is I've heard this said, if you take somebody from the 1940s and show them a movie, like a hit, show them a Marvel, any movie you think is good that was made in the last few years, they won't be able to follow it. Because the visual storytelling in movies has changed so much from the 1940s to now that that people, like someone from then, wouldn't be able to follow a modern movie. They'd be, because they haven't been watching them all these years. I think it's the same with comics. Comic book visual storytelling has changed a lot from the 60s and 70s until now. There's a lot of new sort of tricks and just the way a story is told and laid out and drawn is more sophisticated than it was in the 60s and 70s. The problem is, if people don't have that type of literacy, it can be impenetrable to them. So that's why if you've never read comics before, it might be better to start out with comics from the 60s and 70s, because those might be easier to follow and understand, because the storytelling hasn't just like if you've never seen a movie since the 40s, you might have to watch a movie from the 70s before you watch a movie from the 2020s, to kind of catch up on the storytelling. Like if I'd never read a comic before and I read the latest an issue 8 of the latest multi-part crossover of something, I might be a little confused. Or even if I read something like Department of Truth, one of my favorite books. If you picked up, issue 8 of Department of Truth, you might be a little confused by it, because the storytelling in that one and the art in that one is kind of very complicated. So if you never read comics before, you might not be able to get into it, just because you don't have the experience you don't have that vocabulary built up. It's like, it'd be like reading a book with only knowing a certain percentage of the vocabulary in the book. I've been reading the initial Spider-Man and FF issues. They're cool and interesting, but not easiest reads now. Yeah, I'll like when you go. Another problem is going back and reading those old issues. Sometimes they explain too much for us today. If you're used to the decompressed storytelling of today, where everything's stretched out and everything happens right away and they explain it to you, it can be a different experience too. My favorite comics of all time are 63 to 67 Spider-Man, but they were so expensive. I agree, though. Those ones are special. Those Steve Ditko Spider-Mans to me are special too, and even when I go back and read them now, they're still, you can tell something was special going on there. But I don't know how many people would be able to pick up on that if they were into today's current comics. The stories are good. It was also the first time everything was. Imagine having to write the 800th Spider-Man story. Whew. What do you write? I think that's the problem with. It was always one of my points of view on life is on comics is your average person has anywhere from 5 to 10 years of being a sort of mainstream superhero comics fan before they have to move on to other comics, or a lot of them give up comics altogether. I mean, most of my comic book friends have given up comics altogether. Once again, I think they're chasing that 10 to 14-year-old nostalgia rush. That's why, and they can't get it anymore. That's why they don't, one of the many reasons they don't buy comics. But after 5 to 10 years of reading mainstream superhero stories, they repeat themselves, because there's really, only so many themes you can tackle. And that's why I moved on to indies fairly young. I feel like there's more than, but I feel like that's more of a person jumping into a story halfway, though. No, I think U.S. comic books layouts are intuitive enough that anyone can follow along. It depends. I think some of it is and some of it isn't. It depends on the artist. I did one thing. I mentioned this a couple of times over the years. Where it was a couple of years ago. What I did was I read some random latest Marvel comic just to check it out. And I felt a disconnect with it. And I said to myself, why am I feeling this disconnect? Is it the storytelling? Because that's what it could be. It could be the artist didn't tell the story well enough to get me in. The writer didn't tell the story well enough for me to be involved. Jack Kirby is certainly one of the best artists. Good evening, sleepy reader. And I noticed that, I said to myself, especially at Marvel and DC, artists have been downplayed and devalued so much. And I said to myself, what is the artist doing here? I got it in my head that the artists have been devalued so much that it's not always noticed by the editors what they're doing, because they just don't know, a lot of them. So what I did was I read the story with the writing. Then I read the story without looking at the writing. I just kind of looked at the pictures and saw what story the pictures were telling. And in about half the cases of the stuff I checked, because I went and checked out more stuff, about half the cases, the artist was telling a subtly different story than the writer was writing. And I think the story the artist was telling was a visual story that would read without the writing on it. Sort of like the artist hands in his pages without writing on them these days. So when an artist does his page, the script doesn't get on it. There's Paulo.
Here I am.
Good evening, Paulo.
And you could have called somebody to come in for the last half an hour.
Yeah. I didn't plug in my computer. I just noticed my battery's going lower.
Oh.
I better plug that in. Hold on. But I'm just telling once again the story of how I think artists are doing something slightly different than the writers at Marvel and DC. In that, like I said, I looked at just the art, and I think part of what artists are doing now is, like I said, since they've been devalued and the editors aren't really paying that close of attention, the artist is sometimes telling a slightly different story with the pictures, because, like I said, the words don't go on a comic until the art is done these days. It used to be you lettered on the boards and then it was inked or they were done. So now it's like, I think the artist sometimes is drawing for his next job. So he's drawing a story, not that it's radically different than the writer's story, but he's the editor is looking at just the art without the writing on it and has to like it. So I think the artists are making sure they're telling a good story that the editor just looks at. So he thinks, so he's like, they're doing a good job and keeps giving them work. He's not necessarily thinking about the script. He's thinking about, I have to make this thing look good. I mean, I'm not saying they're not following the script. They are, but if there's a choice between what's going on in the script and making a panel that looks good without words on it to the editor, I think they're choosing the latter. It's just a weird thing I noticed. I suspect storytelling is a big part of it. There's such a distance between the artist. Yeah, it's strange. Like I said, that I was talking about the disconnect I had reading some Marvel and DC stuff, because I think there is more of a disconnect. Not to all writers and artists, but just a big portion of them. Do you think that the part of that is maybe you grew out of the superhero? Oh, I definitely grew out of Marvel and DC. But like I said, when I was reading them, if something's good at Marvel and DC, I can still generally get into it. That's what I was examining. That's why I was examining why I wasn't getting into it. I'm saying to myself, why am I not getting into this book?
But the current crop of artists, they don't like superheroes either. But the problem is that they don't like superheroes. George Tuska didn't like superheroes. Yeah. What we had is we had a generation of artists who had formal training in storytelling, but also had the necessary notions of body language and anatomy and three-dimensional perspective. And then we got a new and then by the time we got to the direct market, we had a generation of artists who wanted to be comic book artists, and they grew up reading superheroes and they wanted to work on superheroes, and that's how we got Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee. McFarlane stuff didn't actually like superheroes, as we could see from Spawn, but there was all those guys who wanted to do superheroes.
I think now we've got a generation of digital artists,
right? But these guys, they don't have the formal training of the 60s and 70s guys.
No.
They did not grow up reading superheroes, but they have pop culture references. But I think those pop culture references are so bland that they can't do anything particularly explosive with it.
Well, I think it's also because they're digital. They use digital reference material, which kind of makes things look very real, which is what is wanted a lot of the time. But it takes out sort of the fantastic element of it. It's like the exaggeration of superheroes isn't there because a lot of people are using digital models and the same digital models for every body. And the perspective is all perfect and the bodies are all perfectly but the imagination isn't quite there sometimes. Do you think that at some point Marvel movies will die out and Marvel will go back? No, I don't think Marvel movies are dying out. And movies and comics are separate in Marvel. And the movies make a whole lot more money. Marvel would target kids again as an audience. They will go back to this. No. I think once again, Marvel and DC have a problem. Good. Everyone's saying hello, Paulo.
Hey, Ted Goblin. Hey, Terrence. I don't think the problem is targeting kids because all of our experience that goes back to to cartoons from the 50s and 60s and illustrated books and stuff like that. Whenever they do something for kids, it's stupid and it insults kids' intelligence. The comic books, even if they were corporate like Marvel and DC already were in the 1970s, they still had that outlaw element that allowed them to focus on kids as a target group the same way that cigarette companies did. There was that forbidden element, like the parents, I don't want you to read those stupid comics. Those stupid comics are both childish and full of violence.
Right.
But so that allowed them to have that cool element like smoking cigarettes did.
Right. Also, I think one of the problems that Marvel and DC both have these days, as the bat penis exemplified in the Black Label, whatever Black Label that book was, where they showed Batman's penis in a panel or something like that. There was a huge uproar about it. Marketing the same characters to adults as you do to kids is a problem.
Yes.
Because you can never make it grown up enough for the adults. And if you brush that line, you can get in trouble with the kids departments.
I think if you go with this is made for smart 15-year-olds, there will be adults who like it. Right. Just for the simple reason. When people start listening to all these stations?
Yeah.
It's at that intellectual level that they stop. And they were smart 15-year-olds who never developed an interest in classical music or Franz Kafka or stuff like that. They were smart 15-year-olds and they plateaued.
Right.
And then they started listening to oldies. So that is the level the level of intellectual maturity that you can do with superhero comics that is acceptable to an adult audience.
Right.
That a 12 to 15-year-old will find appealing in a revolutionary manner without actually being revolutionary.
Yeah, that, like I said, that smart. That I always say Stan Lee's greatest contribution to comics was deciding to make comics for smart 15-year-olds.
Yes.
And it's like, and it was a complete fluke that he had not only the ability to do that, but he was the boss. It's like there was no one. It was such a overlap of events that allowed him to do that. That is kind of amazing to me that it ever happened.
Yeah, there's such a confluence of events happening. It's Atlas not being able to distribute 100 comics a month. Then Joe Manilli dies and Jack Kirby comes back. Steve Ditko is crazy as always, and he has that Stan thinking that he could do better than recycling silly jokes from Millie the Model.
Right.
And
Stan Lee also being the last man standing at Marvel because he was a relative of Martin Goodman. If he wasn't a relative of Martin Goodman, they probably would have fired him at some point.
No, that has nothing to do with it. Martin Goodman once fired one of his brothers.
No, I think that's the only reason. I think that's the only reason Stan Lee was the last man standing. Because why fire a relative? I'm saying if Stan screwed up, he would have fired him. I'm not saying he would in no way have ever fired Stan Lee. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying he was the last man standing because he was if he had done something to make him fire him, he would have fired him. I'm not saying, but he didn't, and he fired everyone else, but Stan, and like if Stan wasn't a relative, he may have gone in one of the other firings, and some other relative may have been there who had nowhere near Stan's talent.
Stan was the last person there since the 1940s.
Yeah.
So there was that familiar, even without being a relative, there was that familiarity that might as well keep this guy. He's the one I've known for the longest.
Just the idea that he was still there.
Yeah, but none of the other guys were there since the 40s. Right. Not even not Simon and Kirby. Not Bill Everett was in and out. Carl Burgos was in and out.
And by the late 50s, I think he was literally the last employee. I don't even think he had an assistant or anything. By the mid to late, whenever that big, when he lost his distribution company.
Yeah. Well, Burgos was kind of considered the art director in that manner that John Romita was the art director. He was there to do cover corrections. But yeah, the bullpen with salaried people was never that big as they led us to believe. They had a group of writers and artists that were dependable. But they were all freelancers. The writers kept coming back. Here's a script, give me money. And the artists kept coming back. Do you have a script? Yeah, here's one. Okay, here's the art for the script. Give me money. That was it.
Yeah, and I was also thinking it's also Stan Lee certainly has got more credit, I think, than he deserves in terms of comic book history. But I still think he is one of, and I personally am not a huge fan of Stan Lee's writing, but I still think he's one of the top creators. Now, certainly he wouldn't have been able to do everything that happened without Ditko and Kirby, who I think were tremendous creators. But if Stan Lee were just sort of the average writer-artist, I don't think Marvel would have happened either.
Yeah. What did Fantastic Four have that Challenge of the Unknown did not? Yeah. Because Dick Wood was not Stan Lee.
Right.
And of course, in terms of being an editor, Stan Lee knew how to extract from Kirby and Ditko what the DC editors did not allow Kirby to extract from himself.
I don't even think he knew how to extract anything. I just think Marvel was so small he could just leave them alone. He knew to trust them. He knew to trust Ditko and Kirby in a way that somebody at DC couldn't do because there was too much. I mean, as big as Stan Lee's ego was, that he would take credit for everything that's not nailed down, it still wasn't the same kind of ego that Mort Weisinger at DC or somebody like that would have, where you're at the most successful comic book company with the most successful comics. So of course you think it's you who's in charge of this, who's making all the right moves, and you don't want to rock any boats. So there's no way and Stan Lee, working at a small comic book company and being an actual pretty creative guy, can say, hey, well, you know what? I am tired of making comic books for dumb 8-year-olds. I want to make comic books for smart 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
And that to me was his biggest contribution
Mm-hmm.
to comic history, and him being in a position to be able to do that and be able to pull it off is just like amazing. Because
Yeah.
I can't see anyone else in comics who had the talent or was in the position to be able to do that and knew all the talent and knew all the right guys to trust and let them do their own thing. I find that interesting. Yet how many artists are dealing with script and translation? There's that too. Yeah. Today's kids aren't reading comics. Do they both make comics aimed at the new generation of kids in graphic novel form? I think if we were going to look at comics aimed at kids, it has to be the YA stuff that we never even see. That's the only stuff aimed at kids. I haven't grown out of superheroes, but there's fewer and fewer superhero comics I can enjoy. I can still enjoy the better books of the 80s and the early 2000s. I've grown out of Marvel and DC. I've grown out of the idea, and I did it a long time. I grew out of the idea that I like Spider-Man, Batman, the Hulk, Superman. I do not like them. I do not like characters. I like what creators may have done with those characters, but I do not have any liking for any character. I have liking for the creators.
Yeah, I spent a good 3 to 5 years there, hoping it would get better, and I noticed that it was not getting better.
Yeah.
Or if you don't like the description of better, at least not familiar in the. If you think of the Marvel universe as a cultural product, that cultural product had reached the zenith that was no longer being reproduced, and I was waiting for it to come back, and it didn't.
Like I said, the way Marvel and DC market to children too is not that you like Steve Ditko's Spider-Man; it's that you like Spider-Man, and it takes a while to get out of that mind. Some people never do. Some people still, want to and they stop reading because they're not really a Spider-Man fan. They're a fan of Todd McFarlane doing Spider-Man. They're a fan of Dan Slott writing.
I have the
Spider-Man.
perfect character for that description. Even though I was reading Iron Man as backups, but I never managed to connect to Iron Man as a solo character in any way since the Leighton Michelini Romita Jr. run.
Yes.
None of the other runs did it for me. Not even when they had Romita coming back and John Byrne was writing.
Right.
Never. And I went through Thor runs that I liked. The Avengers, to me, went through several writers and artists, and I always managed to stay connected. And the Sani's Daredevil one was not Frank Miller's, but it was very, very interesting, and I kept going. The Punisher is so predictable, and I always kept coming back. But
sometimes you can like the formula that the creators use. You can actually be a fan of sort of a genre, because a genre that comes with tropes. You can be a fan of that genre, and like look at horror fans, especially horror movie fans. They like bad horror movies. They like good horror movies. They like mediocre horror movies.
Yeah.
Because they like the genre tropes that are in a horror movie. I think that's a thing. But I don't think liking... I guess if a comic book character has got their tropes so down, you can maybe be a fan of a character. But I think that happens so rarely.
Sure.
But I guess it could.
Yeah.
But that could also be why people get mad when people don't follow the tropes. Because if you're a Spider-Man fan and all of a sudden no one follow... Well, it's also weirdly different with comic books too, depending on which year. Because I'm a Bronze Age Spider-Man guy.
Yep.
And I gotta say, Bronze Age Spider-Man was pretty darn dull. It wasn't until I read the Ditko Spider-Man that I realized, now I know why people think Spider-Man is special.
I do like that phase because that's when I started. But if I go back, I still like reading it. When you had the two titles plus Marvel team up, and Marv Wolfman was writing a lot of it.
There's some Marvel team up I like better than the Spider-Man stuff.
Yeah.
Like Marvel team up like 38 to like 54 is classic to me.
Sure.
Classic team up story works real well. I think that's about as good as you can do, like a team up book. That's the way it's structured and drawn. But like most like I said, Spider-Man just what. But I can see like if you grew up on Batman in the 80s and you liked, but it's not really Batman you like. It's the 80s Batman tropes that you like. I don't know if they are since I didn't read them, but they probably exist. And once they don't exist in the 90s and the 2000s, you might say, "Oh, I don't like Batman. Batman isn't as good as it used to be." Well, that's because they've moved on. There's different set of tropes now that they use. So I can see you should really be a fan of the creators, as I think that's the right thing to do if you want to enjoy comic books. But I can see how you might be a fan of certain tropes of characters. But those tropes change over time. Stan Lee was I actually, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of Stan Lee's writing, and I always say I think he takes too much credit, but he was I don't say it enough. He was a talented man, and he was really one of the big talents too. As an editor, as a writer, as a general comic book creator, he was a bigger talent than just about anyone else almost ever. But no one's been in the position he was in. No one, because once again, it has to do with him being the last man standing at a small company. I've heard it said many times that in any kind of hierarchy, any kind of corporate environment, a pyramid, the creative people get washed out because what happens is if you're a creative person and you go to work for a corporation, the first jobs you get with a corporation are terrible, horrible, boring jobs. And you leave. You find something else to do. And it's usually the less creative people who move up the hierarchy, because anybody who's super creative does not get to run a hierarchy, a big company. But Stan Lee was in such a small company, and like I said, he for whatever reason was the last man standing, that he actually had the power to say, "I want to make comics for a 15-year-old," and no one else since has had that power. No one else before, and no one else because it just can't happen. It's like no one who's running Marvel and DC are not the most creative people there. They're the people who can exist in that corporate environment and move up, and they have to, not make waves. So it's just amazing that Stan Lee was ever in the position to revolutionize comics. Great point. I think the Silver Age was the result of the scarred veterans of the Golden Age. Yeah, and a few I think of Lee as a top editor and creative curator. Yeah, he definitely. I think that he was good at making characters, but man, here's what I say about his writing, though. I'm a Bronze Age guy. That's why I don't like Stan Lee's writing. You give me Stan Lee's writing in the context of the 1960s, I'm a Stan Lee fan.
But don't think of him as being good at making characters. If you put get me a list of every character debuting in Fantastic Four from number 1 to number 102, I will tell you which ones were created by Stan and which ones were created by Jack, and you will find that Jack created over 80% of them, and the good ones were all Jack. Miracle Man from issue number 3, Stan. Everything that has a cool sounding science fiction-y name, Jack.
This is what I mean by I'm going to give Stan Lee a little more respect than I usually. if you compare Stan Lee to Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, I don't think he measures up. But they're the top. Stan Lee, if you compare Stan Lee to any other, Stan Lee on his own as a creative guy is one of the top guys. He's not the, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko are still a level above him, but so is everybody. They're a level above everybody. Stan Lee is just, though, I would put him one level below them in terms of being a creative guy, and he's certainly many levels above every other editor writer. He's many levels above Roy Thomas. He's many levels above, I don't know, Paul Levitz, who I think was a great Paul Levitz was a really good executive. And I think Paul Levitz was also a solid writer. But he's not a creator like Stan Lee was. He's many levels above Bob Harris and Tom DeFalco. Well, once again,
Roy Thomas was not creative in that sense, but technically he was much more accomplished than Stan ever was. And by the time that the people who started reading, when Stan and Jack were still there, and they were firmly entrenched at Marvel, having Roy there kept them there because he had the technical writing know-how to keep them entertained. They would have grown out of Stan.
I see Roy Thomas more as a technician than a creative.
That's not necessarily bad.
No, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying he was the most interested in putting the pieces together and making sure they fit.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was more interested in that than in entertaining. Not that he wasn't interested in entertaining. I don't mean to, but I would just put Stan Lee above him in terms of just pure creativity sort of thing. You might not. I don't know. But and Roy Thomas was also, he wasn't an editor for that long.
No, he was there for 3 years. And then he found out he could make more money writing than being an editor.
Right. So he didn't really make that big an impact.
Mm-hmm.
I think his editorial impact was very little. His writing impact much, much bigger. Mm-hmm. Stan Lee's editorial and writing impact were both big. It's amazing and mind-boggling that you can come back to a shop 40 years later and a character you were following back then is still being published every month. Exactly. Mm-hmm. But why would you expect to like it? That's what I find that people would still expect to like that character that they liked when they were 14.
Yeah,
that it isn't the same after 40 years of continuous publication. Exactly. That's what I mean. Yeah. Make that 60 years. True, Gus. Except not many people wait 60 years to return, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought Stan Lee was the best marketer and promoter. That was his great. See, I don't know. I mean, he certainly did a good job promoting. I don't know. I don't know why Marvel Comics got popular. Besides the fact that they're good and they were far more entertaining to a smart 15-year-old than any other comic on the market.
Mm-hmm.
But Marvel Comics could have failed. Couldn't they have? I mean,
they could have. Yes.
Yeah.
We don't know, but it was possible. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, did Stan Lee's, when you say marketer, was that him? See, people always say that, and I don't know what it means. He occasionally did radio interviews and tried to get in the newspaper.
Yeah. But it took about 4 years between Jack starting coming up with interesting concepts and Stan being able to use that to promote himself. I think it was that interview that appeared in the newspaper that made it.
And also he did the vast majority of his marketing and promoting in Marvel books.
Yep.
So it's kind of like, maybe that would get you to buy more Marvel books if you were already buying them, but what would get you to buy the Marvel books to begin with? Is his marketing promoting would we consider that him trying to go outside? Because I can't think of any other. Were there other editors in the 60s who the papers were interviewing and had radio interviews and stuff like that? Not that I've heard of.
No, Julie Schwartz. Nope.
Do any of those guys like in was it really? Because that doesn't seem like a.
Not even Bill Gaines, and by that time he only had Mad magazine.
That doesn't. It just doesn't seem like a big enough thing to make Marvel successful. But was it? I don't know.
I think it was. What I'd love to know is how did that journalist wanted to get to know Stan and Jack, and then decide during the course of the interview that Stan was the idea man.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine that if you're the editor of the New York Times and you tell go interview these comic book people, and the journalist is going to say, why the hell would I want to interview comic book people? So somebody in a good position to saw something, and it was not somebody you'd expect.
Yeah, it's interesting. Who invented the Impossible Man? Was it Jack or Stan? I think
it was Jack.
That was Jack?
Yeah.
Stan Lee engineered a flawed heroes universe. That is his best contribution.
Well, I wouldn't say that the universe was engineered.
It just kind of happened. But also one of the big things that I think, and it was Ditko in the Marvel universe, what we see all the time now is the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Ditko specifically, well, Stan Lee too was into it, but that's Ditko was really into it, and the hero's journey, for those who don't know, a Joseph Campbell thing. It's all in storytelling. We start out as nothing, and then you go on a journey, and it transforms, and all the trials and tribulations along the way in the journey. At the end of the journey, you come out a hero, and you save the day. Almost every superhero was already a hero. And now we see it all, like Star Wars. Luke Skywalker was on the hero's journey. Everything we see nowadays, everybody is on the hero's journey. 60s, that wasn't true. It was especially not true in comic books. So Spider-Man being on that hero's journey was a new and refreshing thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was what was different about Marvel too, was Spider-Man specifically, and I think that helped make it popular. But once again, just the comics being good isn't enough to make it popular. So I wonder what made it popular. Jack Kirby. Best comic of all time is Amazing Spider-Man 3. Oh, okay. Stan Lee innovated bringing readers into a community of fans. That's what I think of in terms of him as but he did that in the books. What made people buy the books to begin with? That's or did you just, or was it just that maybe if you stumble onto one DC book and you go, oh, that was fun, and then next time you go back to the stands, you maybe buy a DC book, you maybe buy a Charlton book, whatever.
Let's go to Mike's Amazing World and let's pick out, I don't know, June 1963. Let me pick out June 1963.
But if you buy you stumble onto the stands, you buy a Marvel book, you get a sense of community. And next time you go to the stands, you're like, I want to look for another Marvel book. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was enough.
You know what? People don't pay that much attention to the cover copy. And I think the cover copy would have worked. So let's see.
Yeah, I think
I don't think it would have worked for Amazing Spider-Man #4. This is not a very good Ditko cover.
Yeah, I think once you picked up a Marvel comic, you may have gone back to look for more Marvel comics. Maybe that was really the key to the popular. Because, like I said, I always hear Stan Lee's a great marketer and promoter, but what does that mean outside of comics? I'll tell you why Marvel became successful. In the 60s, DC was awful. The Batman comics and Superman comics were not good at all because everyone just moved. But I understand.
The quality alone, it was what Jerry was saying a few minutes ago. Quality alone is not enough.
Yeah, quality alone does not make success. That's the problem. with that. I understand Marvels were terrific. Like I said, but we've seen in this world plenty of Betamax did not beat out VHS, even though it had much better quality because there's other factors. And they had Jack Kirby, exactly. Stan leaned into the right things, even if he didn't invent them in a way that most editors weren't flat. Yeah, that's what I mean by saying he was in the right position, and he really did creative things. He, like the guys at DC. DC was the 600-pound gorilla until the late 60s. I mean, in the beginning of Marvel, DC was still kicking Marvel's ass. They had no reason to believe Marvel would be successful. King Spode in the house. I agree with Jared. When I was 14, I was stuck at Marvel. Yeah. That's where as a 10-year-old, I totally kept going back to look for Marvel comics. DC, it was the late 70s for me. In DC, I found bland and dull. When were you reading Sleepy Reader? Sleepy Reader was early to mid 70s when he was a kid. I think he's a few years older than me. I was the mid to late 70s.
So I'm trying to take a look here at the June 66 covers. And, well, the Marvel covers are pretty good, but they are not miles ahead of the DC covers. They're better than the DC covers, but they're not miles ahead. And a kid going through the newsstands and saying they probably wouldn't be able to tell them apart in terms of difference. There's a couple of DC covers that are interesting. So I don't know. There's maybe we should be looking for that one thing.
No, now that I'm thinking about it, it might just be that how brand conscious was your average comic book reader in 1962? Because I'm sure there were comic book fans who were brand conscious, but the majority of comic book readers, I don't think, were comic book fans.
No, and unlike DC and Charlton, and Marvel did not have a brand in 1962.
Right. So I'm thinking maybe Stan Lee's marketing was if I'm a 10 or 12-year-old looking for a comic in 1962, and I'm not that brand conscious. I may know Batman, I may know Superman, I may know Charlton, I may know Harvey, I may know the characters in the comics, whoever's done. And I see, and just for whatever reason, a Marvel comic catch my eye, and I pick it up and I bring it home and I read it. And I like it. It's a quality comic, but it also has all of the sort of fan building stuff in it. I might go, next time I might go, hey, you know what? I want another Marvel comic. That it might just be that he created the brand among the readers and no other comic book company had a brand among the readers.
Sure.
That it could have been as simple as that.
Yeah.
71 to 77.
But although that helped, the thing I think I remember John, I think it was John Byrne or Chris Claremont, maybe Byrne, because Byrne's parents hadn't immigrated from the UK to Canada yet, so we still picked up the comics in England, and I think he said Fantastic Four. It was Fantastic Four #5. He picked it up. I guess he wasn't thinking too much about it. But from what I remember, his description is that after reading it, he needed to have the other ones.
Right.
After reading it. So if you stumbled upon a Marvel comic, you want a comic, you don't care. You stumble upon a Marvel, and all of a sudden there's something there that grabs you. And Fantastic Four #5 still did not have the Marvel brand, still did not have the bullpen bulletins or Stan's soapbox. That does not appear in the first Fantastic Four comic to have it is #14. Because that came out the following month after Amazing Spider-Man #2.
The whole corner box thing was a Ditko suggestion too, if I remember correctly.
And it debuts in Amazing Spider-Man #2. So the first Fantastic Four comic to have it is #14. So if you pick up #5, it's still the story that has to rope you in.
And think about that for a second. Steve Ditko suggests they should make this corner box. Where else but Marvel would they take that suggestion?
Charlton might, but it didn't suggest it there.
I doubt it. Charlton, I don't think that.
Maybe they wouldn't have cared.
I'm just saying they wouldn't have cared to listen to the freelancer.
Mm-hmm.
But Stan Lee was in such a position where he did everything there that he heard a good idea and he's like, "Hey, let's do that."
I can see it now. Steve Ditko shows up. Why don't we put a cardinal box in here? Interesting concept, Steve. I'm glad I thought of it.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, your average comic book editor isn't going to do that. Isn't going to... If somebody suggested to, Mort Weisinger that they should change the cover design, he would have gone, whatever. Because they got cover design people. They got people making those decisions above his head.
Mort Weisinger would call
making that decision.
Mort Weisinger would insult you, call you stupid in 20 different ways, and think, "Who the hell do you think you are to even come up with ideas like that?"
So it's amazing, but that was as Stan Lee was smart to read the name Marvel a lot once he saw some success of their characters, so that you wanted all the Marvel characters. I think that was it, but I think that was also. It wasn't him doing radio interviews and stuff. I think it was him doing that stuff in the comics. So once you bought a comic, you wanted into that world, but you had to stumble onto them to begin with.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it would be Stan's idea or Martin Goodman's. One thing that you saw in Marvel's, even going back through the 1940s, and it happened in all the genres that have ongoing characters. You'd see it in the teen comics as well. You would have, if the comic was 52 pages, you would have 3 stories from the titular character,
right?
And then you'd have 1 or 2 from one of the other titles, so that advertises the other titles. And that was in the 40s. That was definitely Martin Goodman who would come up with that idea.
Okay.
So
a lot more pages to fill.
Yeah, so in the 60s, because the first appearances of characters in other stories, they were not there for literary purposes. Let's put this character here. See, it's advertising.
Yeah, there's another thing. Stan Lee would reference back issues in the current comics. It made the back issues alive. See Fantastic Four #7 or whatever. It made them still live and viable. We started that feeling that there's a kind of continuity, right? Charlton thought of comics as toilet paper. Yeah, I don't know if they would. They wanted to keep those presses going. I had back issue catalogs and dream of having $12 so I could get Spider-Man 35. Oh, I remember that.
You spent $12 on a funny book?
I used to get.
How many lawns did you have to mow to get $12?
I used to get the Mile High Comics catalog. Send them a quarter and they'll send you the catalog or something. And I used to fill out all the comics I wanted to order, but then never ordered them because I never.
And then you notice, how am I going to come up with $60 to buy all of these 100 comics? Graphic Man is here.
Marvel appeared to be the underdog going up against the giant DC and a brand. See, I don't know. One of the reasons I think Marvel succeeded is they made themselves into a brand. I don't know if anybody would see them as the underdog if the other guys didn't have. Because did your average 10-year-old comic reader in 1961 understand that Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman were all the same brand? I'm not sure if they did or not. But Stan Lee created a brand, and then DC had to afterwards. Takes good taste to steal the good ideas. When I was 9 to 14, Marvel felt like my indie comics company, not me. Yeah, comics.
You also have to remember something about Stan Lee's supposedly hip dialogue.
Right.
He was 39 years old. There was nothing hip about him.
Oh, one of the reasons I don't like Stan Lee writing in general is I was a Bronze Age kid. I was reading comics in the late 70s, so I'd read Stan Lee hip dialogue from the 60s. And even as a 12-year-old, I knew no one ever talked like Stan Lee hip dialogue. It was like your old uncle trying to be hip.
Yeah.
But it was like in the context of the writing around it, though. And I know what you mean, sleepy reader, because in the late 70s, collecting comic books of any kind was not an activity that was looked kindly upon.
Mhm.
You were looked at as if you were 12 to 14 years old and still buying comics, you were looked at like the slow kid. People had no idea why you'd be buying comics. That's how it was. As a kid in the 60s, I can tell you the reason I picked up Amazing Spider-Man back in the day was because of the cover. Yeah. I imagine if you're looking at a bunch of the cover and you see one but after you picked up one, did you want more? And did you want more Marvel comics? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, well, when Bert mentions it, it's about Fantastic Four at first. Maybe you want to pick up the other stuff. There's advertising. There's house ads. Maybe if you pick up one Marvel comic and without knowing you picked up another, the kids are at a certain age, they will read everything, even the ads.
Right.
So they will read the
bullpen bulletins.
Yeah. So
what's next?
So they had the bullpen bulletins in this instant soapbox.
Right.
Marvelously written by Smiling Stan Lee.
Yes.
You bought a Fantastic Four, then you bought Spider-Man, and you notice that there's Smiling Stan Lee on both.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah, like I said.
I mean, if you say, man, I like that Fantastic Four, and it's written by this Smiling Stan Lee guy, and now this Smiling Stan Lee is also writing Spider-Man.
More terrific. The house ads with the little covers. I always loved them. Even a back issue for $1 plus postage seemed beyond the budget for me in 1971. Exactly. No back issue. I had a coverless copy of 15, which I paid $35 for. My mom found the receipt for the money order. She said she was going to save it as an example of my children of how dumb I was. Dorks. Yeah. Yes, I guess he did want more Marvel comics. The reason is because of Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko's art. There was something about it that was new and exciting. Which is funny because they were old time. They weren't new. When did Marvel start to reprint all their back catalog? I think that was when they were making it all into a cohesive brand and promoting Marvel. They actually started reprinting some stuff in the 60s.
Marvel Tales and Marvel's Greatest Comics started in the late 60s. So there's Marvel Superheroes.
Right.
But some of the titles were only reprinted in the 70s, like Marvel Triple Action.
Right.
So the Cap and Avengers were not reprinted in the early titles.
But
they never they reprinted Thor some. I think it was Marvel Spectacular. They never bothered with the Human Torch until they had a Human Torch comic in 1974.
They were like publishing some of their Spider-Man and Fantastic Four stuff within a few years.
Yeah, because Spider-Man and Fantastic Four were the best sellers, so it made sense to reprint those stories. But nobody cared if you reprinted Giant Man or not.
Right. That's true. Matter of fact, I think the last time they had regular reprints was the early 80s. Wilson's here.
Oh, hey.
What do you mean?
What's up?
Remember when they restarted some of the reprint programs? When they split the Silver Age books up? Like they started reprinting Submariner and Tales to Astonish. They started reprinting X-Men in Astonishing Tales. This is like 1981, 1982. That might have been the last time Marvel tried regular reprint books, like Marvel Tales or Marvel's Greatest Comic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Marvel Triple Action.
Those were all the 70s.
Triple Action ended in 76 or 77.
Yeah.
They have a new bunch in that lasted from 79 to 81, which was those new Tales to Astonish and Amazing Adventures. And that's it. Marvel superheroes, which had the Hulk, ended in 81 or 82. So did Marvel's Greatest Comics with Fantastic Four lasted until 83. Only Marvel Tales really stayed.
That went to the 90s.
Yeah, to 94
Yeah,
or
Marvel
something.
Tales stayed around. I do remember getting the Fantastic Four one.
I always
when I was
wonder, this is one of my ponderings of comics. Is there anyone out there who has a complete collection of Marvel Tales? I've run into people who like, I used to have a complete collection of Marvel Tales, but I've never run into anybody who actually has a complete collection, because it was one of those books that's overlooked. It's like there's probably more people with complete collections of the Amazing Spider-Man than of Marvel Tales, despite the price difference in the two of them.
I did not realize until I was an adult, and I probably did not realize this till probably came to me within the last 10 years, if even. There's reason to collect anything, really. But the reason to collect Marvel Tales is the covers are different.
Yeah.
I always thought they reprinted the same covers.
Sometimes they did.
I thought it was
sometimes they didn't.
I thought it was just maybe a different coloring or whatever, but I didn't realize that there are Spider-Man covers where Spider-Man's on the cover when the original was Peter Parker.
They sometimes they changed it, sometimes they did. And like in the early 90s they had like McFarlane doing Spider-Man Marvel Tales covers. That if you're a McFarlane fan, that's certainly something to get. I read all the Ditkos and Kirbys and reprints, especially Doctor Strange. Yeah, I read those all in the Fireside books and the Pocket books. That's where most of my reprints came from. I picked up an issue of Avengers in the mid-'70s, and after poring over that one issue for weeks, I felt a strong connection with the whole Marvel world. Okay. Like, I think that was... Because what we're talking about, Wilson, is... you always hear what a good promoter and marketer Stan Lee was. And I've always wondered, what exactly does that mean? And the conclusion we've kind of come to here over this conversation is, Chris Geruso.
Hey.
Good evening, Chris. How are you doing?
What's up,
Chris?
What's up? How's it going?
All righty.
Okay. I just
I'll
got here
recap
myself.
the conversation again for you and Wilson. We were just talking about this evening. Always hear that Stan Lee is a good marketer and promoter. And I've always wondered exactly what that means. Because I know he was always trying to get attention for comics. Because you always hear about Stan Lee maybe doing a radio interview or New York Times interview or whatever interview he could get. But I was saying to myself, did that really make a difference? Not sure. Like I said, the overall question is what
I would
made
say
Marvel
yes.
successful?
It made a difference because of what the general public believes about comics.
Yeah, but how much?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can reconstruct the event timeline, because we need to come up with list several things here. First, it's the emergence of Stan's soapbox. Also, that interview that in a newspaper where Stan was introduced as the genius and Jack as the underling. Stan going to the universities to talk to the kids. What exact order did that come in? Because there are even if the readers needed to get into Marvel before Stan's soapbox became a thing.
But anyway, here's sort of maybe a conclusion we came to, was that we of course know Stan Lee did a lot of marketing and promoting within the Marvel comic books themselves. That was the main. But if you didn't pick up a Marvel comic book, why would you? So was putting myself back in the mind of a 10 or 12-year-old in 1963. And how brand conscious am I of comics? I don't know if I'm that brand conscious, because I don't think the other brands really had a brand. So if I, for whatever reason, see a Marvel comic, pick it up, like it, and it's got all that, we're Marvel Comics, here we go, here's that. Now, next time I go back to the stand, I may say to myself, maybe I want another Marvel. Instead of like, if I was let's just say I was a Batman fan going to the comic shop, I'd look for a Batman comic and get a Batman comic. That wouldn't necessarily mean I'm a DC Comics fan in 1961. That would probably means I'm a kid who's a Batman fan. So if I want to grab another one, what am I going to grab? If I'm a kid Batman fan in 1961, and I'm buying 3 comics, I get 2 Batman comics. What's that third? That third comic isn't necessarily going to be another DC comic, because I don't think there was that much brand awareness. But with Stan Lee creating brand awareness sort of within Marvel, if that third comic I picked up was a Marvel one, and I really liked it, now maybe next time I go to the stands, I say, oh, I liked that Marvel comic, let me get another one of those, in a way I wouldn't with DC or Harvey or Charlton.
One of the things that was explained to me about when Marvel Comics came out, Comic Book Collector was talking about the difference between Marvel and DC. It was just that when Marvel came out, it was such an impact of being different than DC. DC was already out 25 years.
Right.
Silver Age DC compared to Silver Age Marvel, one is really boring and the other one is pop art that college kids are reading.
Yes, but
so
that happened later.
So that's so okay, because I only know like 60s and 80s stuff.
Right.
So again, I'm not too sure what put Marvel on the map. It just seemed like it wasn't until the Silver Ages when Marvel became Marvel. Before that, it was experimental.
It definitely became Marvel in the Silver Age, but before it could be, I'm thinking about the steps it took.
Right.
What was the promotion Stan Lee did to get it there?
Right, because you only care about the story after buying. And we're trying to isolate whatever would make somebody want to buy. So maybe they bought it, they didn't know what they were buying.
Right.
Because you're not brand conscious, you buy a comic.
Maybe they liked the cover. Maybe they liked it. Maybe they just want, like I said,
I'm taking a look here at Mike's Amazing World, and if you try to do a thorough analysis, okay, maybe I know I'm a Jack Kirby fan, but let's take a look at the covers here. They are, as I said earlier before you guys got here, they are not miles ahead of what Carmine Infantino was doing, for example.
Everybody had good covers, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Maybe they were a little better.
Maybe they were different. Maybe they stood out.
Was there a different price point, or did they have the
same 10 cents? A cheers emoticon for Wilson and for Chris.
Thank you.
All right. I'll
they
take
had
it.
some reprints when I started in the early 90s. Spider-Man Saga. I think it reprinted the early Ditko stuff. I remember it was on my pull list, and I felt tricked because it was old and dull. During the later 70s, I started realizing they were removing pages from the reprints. That's right. That page, first Marvel book was Days of Future Past by age 10. That was fully into war comics. The Days of Future Past was that would be a weird one to start on. But
the Days of Future Past came out in Portugal in late 1986.
Hindsight also blurs the late 70s, early 70s. The big Stan Lee promoter from by then. He was a different type of promoter.
But we're looking back and we see everything together. So if we try to reconstruct the timeline of events and try to isolate the ingredients that made everything flow together.
Like Sleepy says, I think it took a year or two for the Marvel brand to congeal into something you could identify. I think you're right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, what made it successful once it congealed too?
Could it also be that it was a comic book? If you look at numbers way back when, people cry wanting those numbers. We hear how many of those books were, went through paper drives and stuff like that, and they got destroyed because it was very disposable,
Right.
very inexpensive. And they were everywhere. Newsstands, drugstores, and they had them all, so they had to be selling well.
Yeah,
Because
but also,
everybody was selling, everybody was buying comics.
I'm also
and
trying to
that's too.
distinguish between a general like you said, lots of kids were buying comic books because they were kids and they were aimed at kids.
Right.
But even then, there were probably comic book fans who were more into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to make the distinction. Would even the comic book fans be aware of brands? Like, I don't think your average kid would be aware of brands.
I do know at one point the reason why I started buying indie books is because I read all the Marvels and DCs.
Right. By the time we came around, we were aware of brands. There was
Right.
Marvel, and there was DC. And other things.
Isn't it fairly like we've all heard the story a million times, which is what you started with? Was it Stan was this great brand?
Right. We always hear Stan Lee's, but what
and they're
does
saying
that mean?
And so, well, the story he always tells a million times, and which is actually kind of consistent with what I've read from Mark Evanier, was he talked to us like he was our friend, and he was hip, and so he had the Stan soapbox and he had the letters, and he's like, if somebody wrote in to us and said, dear Mr. Lee, I'd change it to, hey Stan. And then he'd write back with their first name and establish like this relationship. Right. And Mark Evanier said he definitely cultivated a very loyal brand following, to the extent that Mark himself, when he was a kid reading comics, their thing was like, after school, we know when they're going to put the new comics out on the rack.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one kid that was such a brainwashed Marvel zombie. He would go and try and get there first and sabotage all the inferior DC product.
I understand his technique, but what I don't understand is what made that successful at first.
Yeah.
I understand that working 3 years in, maybe because you can do that and it'd be unsuccessful too.
But the thing is, even the lowest selling comic book back then was still selling more than our current highest selling book.
But
I
that
think
wouldn't
it's just
have made
sheer amount of
the lowest selling comic book still wouldn't be enough to make it something successful. Just like the lowest selling comic book now wouldn't be enough to make it successful. I'm just wondering where Stan Lee's promotion succeeded. What was the venue that it succeeded? I think it must have succeeded in the individual comic reader. The individual comic reader who just picks up comics unaware of brand. And then, like Chris just said, Stan Lee did all these things to create a Marvel brand.
He'd get on TV every chance he got. Like you said, you already covered this.
Yeah. When was the first guy that said, let's get this comic book person on TV or on the radio or on the newspaper? Because certainly there are people. Well, before you guys got here, and I mentioned, if the editor of the New York Times asks the journalist to go interview that comic book writer, Stan whatever, and why the hell would I want to interview a comic book writer?
Yeah, especially since, they probably wanted to interview him because he was already successful. There was some buzz about Marvel. You can't really talk about 1961 in the Marvel age. 3 issues of FF came out that year and no other superhero books. Paulo, if you look on Mike's Amazing Comics on sale, June 62, that looks like the first month you could say there was some kind of Marvel.
No, I'll actually give you the exact date. It's this, and I'm looking at Mike's Amazing World. It's December 10th, 1962, because those comics had March 63 covers, and Amazing Spider-Man #1 and the Fantastic Four #12 both came out the same day.
Wow.
And both were the first to have characters from other books in them, because the Fantastic Four appeared in Amazing Spider-Man #1, and the Hulk appears in Fantastic Four #12. And yet none of those comics have the word Marvel in them anywhere.
Wow. On a side note, Chris held up his triangle, and the angle in the camera is on. I thought he had a super giant ruler with an extreme close-up. Was confused for a second why his ruler was as big as his studio. So now I'm seeing the Marvel name on the covers starting May 1963.
Yeah, May cover 63 starts with Amazing Spider-Man #2, and the next week you already have comics with the Marvel logo in the corner box. The notion of the characters interacting starts in December 62 with the March 63 covers, which is those two comics, Fantastic Four #12 and Amazing Spider-Man #1. But that's the start. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like people have to go nuts going, oh my God, did you see that those characters interacted? That may have been awesome, but it's not like the people are, even the smart 15-year-old who was reading those comics would think, oh man, continuity. They were not going to think like that.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
the only thing that and then are we taking into account that Marvel was limited on how many books they could print?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that,
because that affected as well.
I don't think
that
that
if you're only concentrating on 6 titles, you make them the best 6 titles you can.
But once again, I don't think quality I don't think quality is the answer in that plenty of quality things have failed.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know enough of the golden age where Marvel started when it was timely, because I've never actually seen, like, they really show the Timely logo as a very bad logo. A very bad JPEG logo, but they've never seen them in the books.
No.
And I've never actually seen an official Timely book other than images in like the history of Marvel, but they're always grainy pictures. So did they even exist back then?
There was a period of 9 months between 1947 and 1948 where there was a Marvel logo. Then in 1949 and 1950, for a few, there was a period where the romance magazines had the Lovers magazine logo. Atlas logo starts in 53. And it was there mostly for distribution purposes. But Timely never had a brand unlike DC, because they had the DC Superman bullet. But Marvel never had one.
So that's the thing. And then, do we also take into account like books like Captain America, which was being done by a studio and then being brought in? Were people following the studio?
I don't know.
Those things I don't know.
Internally, yes. The readers, I don't
the readers had any idea.
Right. So they might just be looking at characters, and whatever called to them is what they bought, because what's the difference between the Golden Age Daredevil and a character like Captain America other than the colors? Because there's no other thing on there. There's no branding other than that actual logo of the character.
If there was something that made the readers come back for that particular comic, it was the editor's job to identify it. But the readers would not know how to spell it out. Not in 1942.
Well, in 1963, what was DC's branding?
DC Superman. It was.
Did they have the national, the bullet?
They had a bullet. Let's see. Yeah, they had the DC Superman DC National Comics and the Go-Go checks.
And according to legend, the corner box art was created by Steve Ditko.
Yeah,
exactly. He came up with the idea of. Once again, we were also talking about earlier how, like, I was saying, it was amazing that it's such a long shot that Marvel Comics was ever able to be successful at all, because
they did everything in their power to destroy themselves every few years.
well, even something as simple as Stan Lee had to be there. He was kind of they had to be a small company, because nobody as creative as Stan Lee was going to be in charge of a big company's comic books. By the time Stan Lee was creating Marvel, he was like the last man standing at the company itself.
Mhm.
So he only had to answer to Martin Goodman, who really didn't care that much as long as the comic book sold. I mean, creatively, he didn't. Martin Goodman didn't care that much. So it's amazing that you could get someone as sort of creative and talented as Stan Lee could be in that job. And like I said, to me, Stan Lee's greatest idea was saying, I don't want to make comics for dumb 8-year-olds. I want to make comics for smart 15-year-olds. And was actually able to do that. Because it's like there was no other editor at any comic book company who even came up with that idea. They were content to make comics for dumb 8-year-olds because that's what they had wheeled the industry into. That's who survived. DC specifically was the 600-pound gorilla of the comics industry, and they wanted to make comics for dumb 8-year-olds because that's where they ruled. And so did Harvey and Dell, and who was the one that never joined the Comics Code?
Dell. And here's the thing: Dell actually had brands that were recognizable to a mainstream audience because they had all the other media adaptations, and yet they floundered. I think maybe losing Gold, the Western Publishing Studio who actually produced the comics, it hurt them. But in the contracts were with the studio, I believe, because about 95% of the characters went to Gold Key. But
DC
still,
had no identifiable characters for kids. How about Robin? How about Jimmy Olsen? They had tons of identifiable characters for kids. I don't think that had much to do with it.
I think maybe DC's problem at the time, again, I could only go by what older collectors had told me, was that Superman was their dad's comics.
Well, that's just it. I don't think DC had a problem in the early 60s. They were still the 600-pound gorilla. They didn't have a problem till the late 60s, early 70s.
Could be that that by the time the smart 15-year-olds figured out that Marvel was different, and everything about DC just seemed familiar, and familiarity breeds contempt. All of a sudden, these are for me. These guys, I'm done talking to you. You're DC. You tell me the same thing every day. Smart 15-year-olds could come up with that line of reasoning after a while, I'd say.
Yeah, I understand quality has to be there, but in the early 60s, Batman and Superman ruled. Nobody thought the quality of Batman and Superman in 1961 was low. As a matter of fact, when Marvel came out, the DC editors were like, what is this crude stuff? They saw the Marvel books as crude and unprofessional.
Mm-hmm.
That's, DC
maybe that was different enough for people to go, hey, what's this?
Fans.
I don't know what it could be from that portion.
You're from the punk music generation. 3 chords.
It built up very slowly. Perhaps Lee slowly seeing what was succeeding and leaning into it. I think, like I said, he even took the idea of corner box from Ditko. How many editors were going to do that? How many editors was a freelancer going to come in, give them suggestions on cover design, and the editor-in-chief goes, all right, that sounds like a good idea, and implements it?
Yeah, so because maybe you hit the nail on the head when you talked about the small company.
Yeah,
it didn't have to answer to a bigger corporation.
Right.
Martin Goodman was happy with his magazines and all the other stuff.
If it was a bigger company, Stan wouldn't have been in charge.
Right.
DC had a lot of branding. Yes. EC was the first to do this. Stan Lee copied a lot of the EC stuff.
Yeah, but did EC ever sold well enough
to... Yes, it did. EC was a mainstream influencer. It really was. Mm-hmm. EC was not a niche company. They were because they were selling comics in the early 50s before television. That had a lot to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
EC influenced everybody. The EC horror comics and Mad Magazine were huge cultural influences in this country.
Mm-hmm.
But by the late 50s they were gone, so it was brief. But think about that. 30 years later, they were making, Vault of Horror TV show. What was that TV show they
Tales
made?
from the Crypt.
Tales from the Crypt. That's crazy. That's how influential it was that a 30-year-old comic can get a TV show about it before comics got TV shows.
And we don't
Curious
even
about
know,
Wilson's comment that comics that were made by studios separate from corporate bullpens. I've heard this mentioned. This method may return. It's still out there. Like what's his name?
The corporate bullpens evolved from the studios. It was just a matter of buying the studios and bringing them in-house. The reason why the studios existed is because the first publishers, they were packagers. They would buy an allotment of stories and they would use it to fill up the magazines, because what you actually needed to do was move paper from printing to distribution. The money was in printing, not in selling.
Right. The first publishers were just selling paper. Mm-hmm. And studio packagers like Will Eisner and Simon and Kirby created whole comics for them and would give them to the publisher, who would then print them and sell them. Then the publisher said, we're tired of paying those studios. We want our own guys on staff. This is like the early 40s. So in the early 40s, the publishers like DC and Marvel hired their own guys on staff. And then after a couple of years of that, they said, we don't want our own guys on staff. That's too expensive. So then they farmed everything out to freelancers or whatever studios were left. So it was like, first it was studios, then staff, then studios and freelance. But like that second go around, a lot of the studios broke up. And like Lee and Kirby were still around. I mean, not Lee and Kirby. Simon and Kirby were still around, but it was just the two of them, and I don't think they had a big studio. But like Mike Deodato, over the years, has had a big studio, and a lot of like the guy, I don't even know who they are anymore. The guys they hired from Brazil had comic studios.
Mike Deodato's studio wasn't really a studio. It functioned sort of like Neil Adams having the Krusty Bunkers. What they did have was an agent. It was that agent who made sure that there was work available for whoever was around. That model actually was more successful in Spain than in Brazil, because it was the guys that produced war comics for the UK, like Editorial Bruguera.
In the late 90s, Deodato's lost most of his work at Marvel, because for a couple of years it was being signed Deodato Studios, and the quality went down, and the editors could tell he had nothing to do with it. So he stopped being hired at Marvel. And then when he came back, like in the early 2000s, you can tell he was drawing his stuff himself again, and there wasn't Deodato Studios.
Yeah, but the Deodato Studios didn't actually exist. It was sort of farming up. Yeah, he probably took on.
He probably had some assistants and helpers and guys he farmed work out.
Yeah, like Tony DeZuniga did with the Filipinos.
Right.
So there's a book called My Life in Comics by Joe Simon that talks a little bit about that time period and then working in the studio and stuff like that. I started reading it, but I haven't finished it. But that I found was interesting, to how they were working.
Yeah, matter of fact, Will Eisner made his money. He was rich by 22, running Eisner and Iger Studios.
Which he then sold to Iger so he could go when he went to the army.
Yeah, but by the time he left the Eisner and Iger Studios, he was rich.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting way to make money in comics. Had a studio that produces comics for 3 or 4 different publishers, then sell your share of the studio to your business partner because you're going to war. then you're in the U.S. Army and you don't actually need to spend money to live, and you keep all that money.
Yeah. Yeah, he said that he was rich at 22 or something like that. That was his secret to success. I've read him say that. Eisner. He's like, that was my secret to success. I was rich at 22.
The other thing that we didn't talk about with history stuff as well is what was Archie Comics doing at this time? Because
they were doing they had their own thing.
Right,
Like
but they were branded already by then.
They actually, you're right. Archie may have had a decent. They may have been one of the ones that were branded by the early 60s.
Mm-hmm. Creatively, Archie did some things different during that time. Not only when they attempted to do the superheroes, and they had Kirby around for a few of them, but more important to their continued success at that time, when comics that were not edgy, for 60s edgy, they poached Dan DeCarlo from Marvel in 1959. The Archie look that we are familiar with it was not the one from the 40s.
Right.
It's then DeCarlo who starts drawing. You can see DeCarlo stuff on Millie the Model throughout the 1950s, and that was probably the only thing that could fight with Archie. That was what Stan Lee was writing. Stan Lee was writing Millie the Model.
I actually became a Dan DeCarlo fan through a book I bought of his pinup work from the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Really nice stuff. The Dan DeCarlo Archie style, but, pinup cartoons, sort of risque cartoons. Really well done.
I think I have that book.
Yeah.
And I bet that it was Dan DeCarlo who started messing about, doing all those innuendos that we see sometimes from the 60s Archie comics.
Deodato's work at AWA could be done by anyone. I remember Sleepy saying that. He was like, this doesn't even look like Dick Tarla. Kids thought Ben Grimm arguing with Johnny Storm was cool. Yeah. There wasn't a lot of yes sir going on. It was a combination of 50 different things that all came together at the right time. Yeah, I think so. I think it was amazing how many factors went in to Marvel being successful and changing comic books. And it's like if any one or two of those factors were taken out.
Yeah, you look at those comics and you can see the lack of respect that Johnny Storm had for authority. Because you have to remember something. Reed and Ben were already U.S. Army veterans at the time.
Yeah.
They were at least 20 years older than Johnny.
Right.
Who does that kid think he is? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's a safe environment to rebel against the adults in your life. The Fantastic Four comic.
Mm-hmm.
Because Spider-Man did not rebel. Spider-Man was put in a situation that was closer to what you'd find in the Golden Age. Now the kid has to contribute to home economics because one of your parents is gone. But in Fantastic Four, Johnny Storm could afford to be a 60s teenager because Reed's making all the money with his inventions.
Get rich and join the army. The second part of that plan works.
Yeah. Now join the army and get rich. That doesn't exist.
What are you working on tonight, Chris?
Just finished a commission.
And I saw you put out a tweet today that you've got a page of mini Marvels and something coming out.
Yep.
What is it? What's the book?
I guess Edge of Spider-Verse 2.
Edge of Spider-Verse 2.
Yeah, here's the art. Here's the art.
We'll blow it up for you. Hold on. We'll give you a solo layout. So
I don't know if I'm allowed to show you.
Oh,
all right. We can't get too close to it.
I think if I could already get fired.
All right.
Well, this is what I just finished.
Well, all right. We'll blow that one up because it's a commission. Let's see. What is that?
Recreation of the Jim Lee card set.
Yeah, I didn't realize
okay.
how many
I didn't
people
recognize it.
loved this thing. The Jim Lee set. I'm always like, well, there was these trading cards. It's like the Danger Room and Jim, and everyone's like, yeah, oh, yeah, I know that.
Yeah, those cards were really popular. But I think they even Marvel eventually took them and made covers out of them.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. They did that with a lot of Jim Lee's trading card stuff from the like 10 years ago or something. They did.
Yeah, I found out recently that if a company owns the package design,
Yeah.
they get to keep the artwork. I mean, they get to reuse it whatever
Right.
they want to.
There's a Jim Lee trading card book out in August. Oh, okay. A little info from Jeff D.
And I think while I was at Marvel, we did print out a full book that had from one of the card sets where all the artwork was.
Oh, I think there was a Joe Jusko book.
There were a couple of ones because they Marvel did a lot of paintings.
Right.
So there was a book that I think folded out.
Oh, okay.
That had individual images in there that made like almost like a big poster.
I should show off some of the comics I got this week. There's only 4 of them. I only had one comic on my pull list, and that was Miss Meow.
That's issue number 2.
Issue number 2 of Miss Meow.
You like issue number 1.
A little bit of cheesecake in it.
Okay.
And it was pretty well done. Like I was surprised. I liked the first. This is one I picked up the first issue on a whim because there was not much out that week, and I had seen like a million cheesecake covers for it. And I'm not a big fan of the fashion magazine cover. That's just kind of just kind of sits there for me. But I compare it to The Boys, only sort of less offensive.
Mm-hmm.
Less Garth Ennis out there.
Right.
Not that I think The Boys being offensive is a bad thing. But it's this world where instead of superheroes, they're super mercs. And like there's different teams of them. And like the first issue took place.
Super what?
What was that?
They're super, instead of superheroes, they're super what?
Mercenaries. Super mercs. Like the first issue took place like the 29th annual Super Merc Ball. And you had like the different where they like recruit young mercenaries, and there's the different factions vying for each other. And Miss Meow has her own faction, or 2 kittens or something. And they take it pretty seriously, which is funny. It's not really tongue in cheek at all. And in this one, there's kind of a heist one where Miss Meow, the other mercenaries were like, oh, she's trying to steal our something. I can't remember what the MacGuffin was. She was stealing. So in this issue, she's trying to steal it from some secure site. But at the same time, some other super team is trying to steal something too and messes her whole plan up. So I'm surprised I like this one, but I do. Because it doesn't sound like anything that would be really up my alley, but it's well done. So I'm enjoying it. And then I picked up 3 things off the rack just because I only had one comic. So I picked up Twig number 3, which I picked up the first 2 issues, but decided it was a little bit too YA for me, but I really like the art. Mm-hmm. So I was like, you know what? I'll pick up issue number 3. Why not? Because I really like the art. And the art and the color are just beautiful. It's this little twig guy on a quest to do something.
Looks very European.
It does. You know, so it's kind of YA-ish.
Mm-hmm.
But like the art is the drawing's beautiful, the color's beautiful. It's a very good-looking book. You know, it's got these crazy pig creature here. He was part of the. So I enjoyed issue 3 too. You know, maybe I'll buy some more. But I think that was just one. And it's funny. I don't know if you remember a couple of weeks ago, I picked up Frank Frazetta's Death Dealer number 2 that I thought was number 1 until I got it home and said, oh, there's issue 2. Oh, well, I guess I'm reading issue 2. and I liked it, but it's a $5 book, so I really wasn't going to put it on my pull list. But I liked the art too. So this issue, I see issue 3 is out, but it turns out it's not issue 3. It's issue 1, third printing.
Oh, okay.
So
Nice.
I'm like, I may as well get issue 1. Once again, this guy, what's his name? Stefano Martino is the art, and Luis Antonio Delgado is the coloring. And I really enjoy this art on it. That's why I picked it up. That's why I won another $5 on it. Once again, I don't think it's going to make it on my pull list just because it's a $5 book.
How many pages?
$5, but I like the art on this. It's going to go into my Stefano Martino section now.
How many pages does that have? Or is it an anthology?
No, I think it's got 20 pages of art, 20 pages of story. I counted. I actually checked because I'm like, is it even 24? I think this one was 20. But it also has the other alternate covers in the back too, so that's always good. There's Frank Frazetta's actual Death Dealer illustration. Cover gallery. So it's got 4 pages of covers in the back, which I appreciate at least. Beats 4 pages of ads.
Mm-hmm. And they're nice, clean covers, no text or anything like that. That's really good to see the artwork that way.
Yeah. Like I said, I really like the art. The story's actually pretty good too. It's not. If it was a $4 comic, it might make it onto my pull list. But it's like $5 comics kind of has to be. I have to like them better than $4 comics.
Yeah, those are 2 Spawn comics.
Yeah. And then the last thing, once again, something I picked up just because it was there. It came out last week. Starhenge by Liam Sharp.
Oh, okay.
All I know about Liam Sharp is he's a mainstream guy. I think known mainly DC. Someone explained to me, I forget who it was on my YouTube channel when I showed this, that he did Wonder Woman from Rebirth to the end, and this guy really liked it. Then he took over Green Lantern, and he found at that point Liam's art went too dark for him. And this has definitely got some darkness. And just flipping through it, I didn't really like the art that much. You can see how dark it is.
Liam Sharp developed a new style when he started working on a Vertigo series called Testament. Came out about 15 years ago.
Okay.
And in the 1990s, he was known for working on Marvel UK.
But in reading it, I really liked it. He's the writer on it too.
Oh, nice. The thing about Liam Sharp is he's finally admitting his English.
Font by Dave Given, written, illustrated, and lettered by Liam Sharp. And I have to say, like I said, sometimes you flip through a book, you don't like the art, but when you actually read it, you like it. That was this one here. And I actually read it and I liked it.
Yeah.
And of all things for this to remind me of, it reminds me of Moonshadow from John J. Muth and J.M. DeMatteis in the 80s.
Yeah, and it's the exact same thing. You see, like John J. Muth or Bill Sienkiewicz, Liam Sharp does not have beautiful art style, but it's very strong and it's very magnetic.
And his art and the storytelling isn't always literal. Like if you remember reading Moonshadow, they go off and do little things, and sometimes he'd just be in a room covered with watercolor and stuff. Like I said, the art wasn't always literal in Moonshadow, and it's not always literal in this too. Sometimes he's just giving you a feeling. And the writing actually reminded me of Moonshadow, and sort of it's got that casual tone where sometimes the guy's like, let me tell you this story. Because remember, Moonshadow took place like with an old guy looking back on his youth and telling you the story of his youth. And sometimes he'd be like, oh, let me tell you about this. Oh, hold on a second here. I've skipped this part. And there was kind of some of that going on here. And it was skipping through time, different time frames.
And that, kids, is How I Met Your Mother.
Yes. Which I've just started rewatching, by the way. But like here, all of a sudden, they're talking about one of his they're talking about one of his old classmates in school, and here's his old classmate like in the middle of it's on this one in the middle playing a football game. So it's just like a panel of playing football.
Yeah.
So
Sharp's good at it makes cosmic things look mundane and mundane things look cosmic, and you see that in his Green Lantern work. You're kind of used to thinking, for example, in the last 2 decades maybe, of Grant Morrison and Frank Whiteley as a unit, but on Green Lantern, Morrison worked with Sharp, and it's probably the best collaborative work that I've seen Grant Morrison be a part of, because Sharp has that amount of he's good at drawing and making things look Kirby-esque.
But this double page, spread, this isn't supposed to be literal. It's just kind of giving you a feeling of this giant.
Yeah, but he would do things like that in Green Lantern, like having the picture of outer space, like Kirby did when he first drew the negative zone with that collage.
Mm-hmm.
The Fantastic Four are really small, and he would do the same thing with Green Lantern. The characters would be small, but you could see the space. You could see space, and the characters would just be something like green. Green and small going through a part of the image, and I think Sharp is good at that. Sharp is probably was probably the guy that could get into Morrison's mind, and because he also had the same thing in Testament. In Testament, the thing happened in 3 planes at the same time. And it would be in the modern times, it would be in biblical times, and it would be in the dimension of the old gods. And they were all happening simultaneously, and the characters would be doing the same thing in 2 of the 3 places at once. And Sharp was good at portraying that.
Okay. If you're a fan of Moonshadow, check out Starhinge. I mean, I was surprised that's what I found it similar to, even if it's plot wise, they're nothing alike. This one's got some giant star things going on. I don't even remember what now. I'm gonna have to read it again before I file it away. But I think I'll pick up issue 2 of Starhinge. Once again, it surprised me that I liked it, because something like the other stuff I've been picking. I've never read Liam Sharp's writing or art before. I don't think, maybe that's something here or there. But what have I been buying lately? What's the Gary Frank one with the nuclear guy? And Nocterra by Tony Daniels, and they're mainstream DC guys, indie comics. And as I said I think it was Nocterra, you have to kind of accept that it's a mainstream guys, indie comics. It's going to follow certain, mainstream storytelling stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This does not. It's kind of its own thing. This is more of a sort of genuine indie comic by a mainstream guy.
Mm-hmm.
Paulo is delivering scotch.
Logan, 12 years.
Good old scotch from Scotland.
When I mentioned Scotch whiskey and Irish whiskey brands, and people who don't drink I have no idea.
Yeah, I have no. I was just watching How I Met Your Mother tonight, and he was mentioning scotch. Another How I Met Your Mother callback. But it's rare that I have a week where there's only one comic on my pull list. I wonder. There's something weird going on with 8 Billion Genies, which came out today for everyone else. Issue number 3, but wasn't in my shop. And issue 2 came out at my shop 2 weeks late, but not because it was shorted. What happens is every week I get an email from my comic shop. Here are the comics that are coming in this week for you. And I get the email before they get the actual comics. So what happens is if something's shorted, it's on my email list. It's just not there. It's like, let's just say, Spider-Man number 300. It says in the email, I get to my comic shop, it's not there. That means it's shorted, i.e. the distributor didn't send it to them. Okay. That happens. They'll send it to them over the next 2 weeks. What's weird is with issue 2 and 3 of 8 Billion Genies, it wasn't even on my email that said, this is coming in for you this week. It wasn't on my email. And then, like with issue 2, I was like, where's issue 2? 2 weeks later, it's on my email. And usually, if a comic is shorted and then it comes in 2 weeks later, it's not necessarily on my email for that week because it's really linked to that old email kind of thing. It's in a different part of the system. So I'm like, what's going on with 8 Billion Genies that it's coming in it can't just be my shop. It has to be other places. It's coming in 2 weeks late for no known reason. That's just a strange thing I haven't seen happen before. Been shorted plenty of times. That got shorted on that Savage Dragon thing that came out a month ago and still haven't got it in. But that happens sometimes. Just like, oh, well.
That Super Freaks book?
Yeah, the Super Freaks book. Got shorted on it. Didn't get my copy. Distributor never sent another copy. At least not yet. We'll have to see if they ever send it.
Maybe I'll flip mine. Make a sweet profit.
Yeah, it's probably worth what, $6 now.
I think the cover price was like $8.
I know.
I don't know. I've seen people who seem willing to pay actual money for some recent comics just because they missed a couple of first issues.
Yeah.
And I find it very weird. I mean, the market doesn't seem to be able to handle it, but people are doing it, and I don't really know why. Because if you wait another 5 years, those comics are probably going to be in the 50-cent bin.
They want it now. They
No,
wait another 5
no.
years.
Yeah.
Wait.
You actually want to
years.
read it. You might not want to wait 5 years.
Yes, but in 5 years, the series will have been canceled, and you can read all of them at once.
There are people who do that. I mean, you're right. There are people who buy all their comics in the dollar bin and love to buy. And it kills me when I see the series that I bought for $4 an issue.
Yeah, at least when I buy the trade, I buy the trade when the trade comes out.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna wait for Starhenge to be a trade.
Hey, I don't blame you. But my own problem. Sometime around 2008, 2009, I was buying mostly trades because at that time, before what I call the Image Revolution, when they started publishing a lot of books that I liked, somewhere around the beginning of Saga, my pull list was like whittled down to Usagi Yojimbo, Strangers in Paradise, and maybe a handful of other books. So I was getting like one comic a week. And I'm like, this is crazy. Matter of fact, it was right before DC relaunched everything with New 52. Because right before that, I was even trying out like new Marvel and DC books. Because I was like, I got to find some comics to buy. I'm going to the comic shop every week and buying one comic. This is crazy. So I also started buying collected editions. I bought like the current Iron Man in collected edition, the current Spider-Man in collected edition for like maybe a year and a half. I was buying stuff in collected edition because it's fairly cheap to buy things in collected edition. The problem I had was that it's fairly cheap to buy things in collected editions, and there's a lot of issues in collected editions. So what happens is, here's Jared buying only collected editions because there's not a lot of current comics he likes. So he goes, oh, look, there's a collected edition I can get for $5 to $10. It's 5 to 10 issues. I'll spend $5 on 6 issues of whatever this is. And then I read one issue of it and it's terrible and I don't want to read the rest. And so all of a sudden, I've got a shelf that with this many collected editions on it that are terrible. And you can't get rid of them because I only spent $5 on them and nobody else wants to pay $5. $5 is expensive for those terrible collected editions. So luckily it was like right about that time where Saga came out and Image Comics started putting out a ton of good stuff. So I was able to go back to regular, monthly kind of, and I haven't there've been so much good stuff coming out since then that I haven't gone back. But man, buying just collect, because I used to keep track of when the collected editions were coming out. Look on because you could also get them for cheap on Amazon too. You could get them and I'd get them and let's say I was really good. I would really look into which ones I want to get this one. I'm interested in that. But still, a quarter of them were misses. So if I'm buying 1 or 2 collected editions a week and a quarter of them are misses, that's 25 collected editions a year that are just terrible. So that was the problem I had with collected editions. When you buy one comic and don't like it, you just got one comic. You can get rid of that.
Well, try doing this. Organize a monthly dinner party for comic fans in your hometown.
None of my friends would take them.
Raffle them off for $1.
None of my friends. I tried giving them away to my friends. My comic book, my mostly lapsed comic book. They knew they were terrible. They didn't want them. They were like, "No, I do not need 10 terrible collected editions in my life."
You should see some of the terrible comics that are raffled off in our monthly comics dinner party. What's worse are when somebody says to raffle off of some sort of indie fanzine from 2004 or something. Yeah.
Not enough nostalgia even yet.
Yeah.
So I picked up 4 books this week. Not New Comic Book Day. I've been getting to the comic book shop like on Sundays. So I picked up 4 books. Haven't read them, but at least I picked up new books.
All right.
So I have this what's called Milestones in History #1, which is a DC book.
Let's go solo with you so we can see it.
So it's a side cover.
Was the whole comic sideways or just the cover?
Just the cover.
Okay.
I
enjoy a good sideways cover.
The next book is a book called Red Man. It's a kind of like an Ultraman type character.
Okay.
So superhero that fights monsters. They had a Kickstarter a while back, and I had bought the trade. So it looks like they're starting the series again. I picked that up. Amazing Spider-Man #5.
Okay.
The Marvel book that I came back to just to.
John Romita Jr.
and Scott Hanna.
Scott Hanna. And who's writing it?
It is written by Wells. I think Zeb Wells.
Zeb Wells?
Zeb Wells.
I've ever read anything by Zeb Wells.
I could not tell you if I had, because I don't know what he did before this.
Okay.
And the trade paperback to The Last Ronin.
There's that pains me to look at. Nice varnish. And the reason it pains me to look at is because how much was that?
This was $29.99.
Okay. So I'm not a Turtles fan to begin with. I've never been a Turtles fan. But when that was announced, and I saw it, I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll buy the series. Just because, I've never read the Turtles, but this seems pretty cool. I like the art. It's the last Turtles story. Kind of interested me. It had an $8 or $9 price tag. I can't remember which it was.
I don't know. I didn't. I that was one of the projects where it's like, I'll wait for it to trade, and stood away from any type of information.
And I said to myself, you know what? I was like 5 issues. $8 or $9 an issue. We're up around $45 for this series, right? And I said, and this is what I do sometimes with miniseries. I'm like, do I like that $45 worth? And I said, I know they're going to come out with a nice hardcover for cheaper than that. But I'm never going to get the hardcover. I know that anything I say, I'll wait for that to get collected. I'm never going to get it. There's too many other things to buy. Like I used to do that when I was buying collected editions, but now I never do. So I said to myself, well, if I want to read this series, I'm going to have to read the individual issues, not worry about the collected edition. And then I said to myself, but it's going to be painful every time I see that collected edition, because I'm going to know that if I waited, I could have saved $15.
I did think about waiting for it to come out in paper, in soft cover, but it was like, yeah, with my discount that I get at Midtown, it's like, all right, I can do it. So
yeah, $30. But I was actually thinking I should actually sell my issues because they're all first printings, which means they're worth something. But if I get around to it, I will one day. But I was sometimes like, okay, I'm going to get the issues. It's just going to be painful every time I see that nice collected hardcover edition.
And I'm sure if I was going to the comic book shop on a regular basis, I would have picked up the individual issues. Like I haven't even summed through this.
Fan, obviously.
Yes. So for me, it was like that was something that I got excited about. Not excited about enough to go to the store, but like that looks interesting. And I'll do what I can to stay away from any kind of spoilers.
How are we doing with storage space, Jared? I got a little left. I'm about out of my. You know what I just had to do? I just had to clean. I keep things. Most of the stuff that I want access to, I have on shelves. You know, I got these shelves behind me. I have shelves built everywhere. But I have some comics in like boxes and closets too. Those are really the ones I can get rid of if I need to. If they were easy to get rid of, I would. But if it's in a box in a closet, I may as well not have it. So over the last, I don't know, few years, I've been buying those True Believers dollar comics. It got to the point where they were taking up this much space on a shelf, and I needed the shelf space. So I said to myself, I have a comic box sitting next to my drawing table here that is filled with old Magic the Gathering cards that are in card boxes. That used to be in a closet, but I needed them out a couple years ago, and they've been out since. So I actually said, you know what I got to do? I got to put those old Magic the Gathering cards back into the closet, use that comic box to put the True Believers in so I can have more shelf space for the current comics. I said, okay. Then I went to the closet, and I had to clean out old sheets and pillowcases and blankets that I never used. Put them all in a bag and brought them over to the clothing drop off. So I had to clean out a bunch of sheets in a closet so I could have more space for my comics. But they weren't ones I used, so it was cool. They're just in there. I'm just like, I haven't seen this sheet in 10 years. I can get rid of it. So space is always a problem. Matter of fact, I have in the garage, I have about 1,000 or 1,500 comics that I got from Jerry Kalinowski right before COVID, right at the beginning of COVID, when he was moving his apartments. He's like, can you take these from me? It's like, otherwise, I don't know what I'm going to do with them. I'll have to throw them out or something. I'm like, they're freebies he got from Marvel all his years working there.
Right.
I've been meaning to go through them and maybe get rid of them somehow, they're still sitting out in the garage in a bunch of boxes. And the garage is at maximum capacity too.
Yo, you want check it for keys, man. You want to check it for keys.
The only thing close to keys are the Wonder Womans with Brian Boland covers.
What about Spider-Gwen?
No Spider-Gwen. That's long after his time. And they're also not in...
First appearance Spider-Gwen. That's big. It's a key.
Because
Harlequin.
Because he just kept them in boxes and the boxes got moved around over the years, they're hardly in mint condition too. They're like, none of them are bagged. So it's just kind of like, I have to go through these. I want to make a YouTube video one day about me putting them all in order or something. I'm going live and just look through all Jerry's comics and put them in order.
Yeah, then you stack them in groups of like 25, and there you go. sell them together on eBay. There's a YouTuber I watched that I learned a lot of eBay stuff from, and he's selling comics, and that's what he's doing. He's just, you get a stack of 25 of them or so. This way here, there's a higher price point because if you're selling books for $5, they sell, but the amount of time it takes to wrap them up and ship them out, you kind of eat up that $5. But if you do stacks of them, then that's a little easier to sell. As long as you take a photo and you're, honest on what's there, people buy them.
Yeah, I'll have to see. What stuff can be thrown out to make comic book space? Mags, toys, tax forms? What's on your shelf? Most of my shelf is comics. What's gotten rid of to make more comic space is comics. That's about all I got. I don't have many toys.
Me neither. I don't understand those people who have 500 statues.
Wilson, Chris,
there is just something about them. I've been waiting for a Firestar action figure since 1982. So when it came out, I even got the Lego Firestar just because I'm so denied Firestar items. And Funko Pop still hasn't made one. I got Spider-Man and Iceman sitting there.
Yeah, the thing is, the thing is, if I buy a statue, how many spawns can I buy with the money for that statue?
That's actually in the late 90s. I specifically stopped buying toys and stuff like that so I could buy comics. I can remember it was back when the hardcovers were $50. And I was like, oh, I want that. But I don't have $50 for that hardcover. Then I realized, I had spent $50 on toys that month. Just like discount, just like random toys in the discount bin that I bought over a month. And I'm like, you know what? If I stop buying these toys, I can get the collected editions I want. So ever since then, Then there was a time for a few years where I was buying one toy a year. Then I even stopped that. But occasionally people give me toys. So
when
I still have a bunch lying around here.
When I left Marvel, I stopped buying toys. And that's in the 2000s. And I was always trying to try to put together the roster from the characters from Secret Wars, because that was the books that got me into comics. But they never made all the characters. So when Toy Biz was making a bunch of them, I got a bunch of them, but they never finished making them. And then eventually, like everything else, it ends up in a box and gets put into a closet. And one day I went through the closet to look for something else, and I found my original Secret Wars toys, and it's like, these look really cool. So that's why I started putting them into a shadow box. And then it was like, oh, the Marvel Legends look pretty cool. I have a few of them when they started them, and it's like, oh, wow. I have a lot of the characters that were in Secret Wars, to the point it's like, I almost have everything. So that kind of got me back into looking at getting more characters. I'm buying my childhood back.
Here's the most random toy I have. John Bly gave this to me. It's Navy football player G.I. Joe. Okay.
That's out of the blue, but it's pretty cool.
It's been sitting on my shelf for 20, 25 years.
And also during COVID, I got into miniatures. It's just something like just I had Matchbox for a long time. I would pick up stuff here and there, but just miniature items just clicked during COVID. You know, it was like, oh, I like this.
I still have a ton of Matchbox and Johnny Lightning, that stuff from the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
That's once again out in the garage. I gave away to a couple of my sister's nephews, cousins, but I forget what they are. I was looking in the closet and I had like 2 containers of Hot Wheels toys, like from 2000 and 2001. I used to buy them and put them in because they were $1 a piece.
Yeah,
And put them in like the Hot Wheels holder. I'm like, I should give these to some kids. They're like 8 and 10. So I'm like, oh, you got lucky this Christmas. You each get 50 Hot Wheels cars.
nice.
They were thrilled to have them.
Yeah, and then with those, my mentality is that there's a certain way I would collect the Hot Wheels stuff, and that they have to be movie or television related.
Oh yeah, I've seen some videos on TikTok or Instagram of your Hot Wheels.
Yeah, so I was doing that because it's like, if not, there's so many Hot Wheels cars out there, and they're 99 cents, so they're not too crazy to get.
They're like $1.29 now or something. I think they've gone up in price.
$1.29. You can still find them sometimes for 99 cents, really depending on if they're having a sale and stuff like that. It depends where you go, but $1.29 is average. But they caught on with the collectors where they'll make one that's $4.99 because they have it in a different package. Now you're really buying the artwork,
right?
And I've fallen into that with the He-Man ones. Because they have the artwork on there, and the Batman one, so I still pick those up. I always pick up a Batmobile. Whenever I'm in the store and I run into a Batmobile, I pick it up because, again, favorite as a kid, never had those original ones. So it's like, by the time I had my own money to buy stuff, they weren't making them anymore. And
Johnny Lightning was my favorite in the 90s. I used to buy a lot of Johnny Lightning. And they, at the time, like Matchbox and Hot Wheels were $1. And Johnny Lightning was like $3. So they were the expensive ones, but they were all die-cast metal.
Yep, I have the Lost in Space set. That's one of my favorite sets because of that. Because they did more than just the cars. They would do ships and they would do things like that.
They also were the first ones to start licensing stuff, and all of a sudden you had $5 cars because it had some license on it. Yeah. I was even briefly in the Johnny Lightning Collectors Club in the late 90s, where they mail you a car in a special tin.
Yep. I missed that. I love tins. I don't know what it is about tins, but if you want me to buy it, you put it in a tin.
Though I did make art cars for a while. Mm-hmm. I would buy one car specifically. It was a yellow Matchbox Dodge Viper. And I would paint designs on it with an enamel paint. And I probably did a dozen or two of those. Then one of the things I used to do, I just like paint car. Instead of painting on paper, I'd paint on a Matchbox car.
I used to paint on glass.
Kind of fun.
Enamel paint.
Yeah, enamel paint. Testers,
I used to do that on the testers. Yep, I used to do that on glass. Wow. You just buy the 99 cents frames, and I would make what be like basically the same way a shell animation cell was made, where I would use a rapidograph on one side and then just paint over it, and then there was a mirror image of whatever I was making. I did that for a while, just because it was something to do art-wise.
Ooh, who wants to do a Reed Rippin slab?
Ooh,
nice. All right.
Let me
what
find
do you got?
Where'd they go? Let's go with. Ooh, here we go. We were talking about these April 1974 Marvel reprints. Let's see. Share screen. There you go. There are that's our theme for this one. Marvel reprints from April 1974. We got the Mighty Marvel Western, Marvel Triple Action, and Marvel Tales. 52, 19, and 30. And Chris, in case you've never played this game, Wilson only played it for the first time last week. It's called Read, Rip, and Slab. One comic you read, one comic you have to rip up, and one comic you slab. What would you slab out of these ones? It'd be a waste of money no matter what.
I would slab the Marvel Triple Action because it has Doctor Doom on the cover.
Ah.
I would read, and I actually own that Marvel Tales. And I would rip up the Rawhide Kid.
A Rawhide Kid. See, I'd like to read the Rawhide Kid out of all those three.
You know, I would have already read the Marvel Tales. That's actually.
I think I'm gonna read the Western, slab the Marvel Tales, only because it's a Spider-Man cover.
Right.
And have to rip up Doctor Doom, even though I like that Doctor Doom cover. It's gonna
I'm going to read that Mighty Marvel Western. The Rawhide Kid and the Two Gun Kid stories are from the 60s. So there's going to be some Dick Hayers in there. Matt Slade is from the 50s. I'm going to slab Marvel Triple Action.
Because it's got that great name, Marvel Triple Action.
Yeah. And Kirby cover. So I'm going to rip Marvel Tales because it's a nondescript Kingpin story.
Gus is slabbing Tales and reading Triple Action. Another one, tearing up the West. The Westerns get no respect next to the superheroes.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Marvel Westerns never developed the continuity, so people don't think of them as Marvel Universe. Although there are some repeating points.
They did in the Avengers.
Yeah, that's Avengers number 25.
Is that a Kirby cover?
Yep. Yeah. Because it's Doctor Doom. Because Doctor Doom, Don Heck was already doing the covers normally.
Wonder who did that Rawhide Kid cover.
Probably Larry Lieber.
Yeah, it could be.
Maybe Herb Trimpe. Yeah,
possibly Herb.
Herb Trimpe did some nice inking over himself on some of those early 70s Marvel Westerns.
Larry Lieber said in interviews that he liked working on the Westerns because he could write and draw everything. Yeah. And even Stan wouldn't bother him because Stan didn't care about the Westerns anymore by 1964.
Mm-hmm.
What's Chris's?
I would read the Western, tear up Marvel Tales, and slab Triple Action.
Tear up Marvel Tales. All right. We'll do one. Let's see. Should we? Stop
no
sharing.
Love for Papa Romita.
Let's go deep in time. What do I got here?
Paulo convinced me when he said it's a Kingpin story.
We're going back in time to 1944.
Ooh.
And Standard Comics.
Ah.
Now we're in the Wayback Machine. We got Thrilling Comics, number 44. It Really Happened, number 2, and Exciting Comics, 35. Here are 3 comics I don't know much about, except that's the Black Terror in Exciting Comics. At least I know his name.
Yeah, he's recognizable, and I think I've seen that Thrilling Comics character.
Is that guy punching Hitler?
Yeah,
he's punching Hitler's driver.
He's punching Hitler's driver. You're right.
Yeah, poor Hitler's driver. It's not his fault that he got chosen to drive Hitler around.
I'm so sick of these woke comics being political all the time.
Hitting drivers for no reason.
The character in Thrilling Comics is called Doctor Strange.
That's Doctor Strange? That guy in red?
Yeah, he was repurposed as... He was Doc Strange. He was repurposed as Tom Strange in Alan Moore's Tom Strong stories.
Oh, I did not know that.
So I'm gonna
rip Commando Cubs in action.
I'm gonna rip Exciting Comics.
Oh, ripping up Black Terror?
Yeah,
But he's
Black Terror
running over
bores me.
Japanese guys with a
Bla-
steamroller.
Black Terror bores me. I'm gonna slab Thrilling Comics because it's a close up of punching Hitler's driver, and I'm gonna read it really happened because if it really happened, I want to know what it was.
You want to know what really happened? Is what
Yes.
you want to know.
See, I really want to read all three of them.
He is shooting guys with a Tommy gun that he's running over with the steamroller. Is that really necessary? Does he have to shoot them? The guy's under the steamroller. Does he think that's not going to do him in?
I would slab Thrilling Comics. I would rip up It Really Happened. And I would read Exciting Comics. Like I would need to know, was it worth it?
The Japanese soldiers were Japanese soldiers really steamrolled over.
And it's the kid who's running the steamroller. Look at that. That kid's like 10 years old.
And wait, why is Black Terror shooting them if they're already being steamrolled?
Yeah. Does that steamroller say "Made in USA" on it too? I see USA.
It has the USA logo. I don't know if it says "Made in" though.
Let me see if I can.
Can't make that out.
Let me see if I can make it out on the bigger.
Yeah,
size.
Made in Japan. Made in Japan was still not a thing in 1944. Although that would be ironic.
Now, I definitely see USA, and I see some letters before it, so it must be Made in USA. You know what? I think I'm going to slab Exciting Comics because I've talked about that cover so much. Which means I'm going to have to read Thrilling Comics because I want to see if Hitler's driver survives this. And I'm going to have to tear up It Really Happened. Thrilling Picture Stories. The Terrible Tiddlers. The Terrible Tiddlers. Who could they be? Man.
And there are 5 various images on that cover, so that might be a very hefty book too.
Yeah. What about you, Chris? You got to. What year is that? That's August 1944.
You know, I can't. This is on my phone, so these are
can't
all
see it?
even
Too
smaller
tiny?
than postage stamps.
Oh well. Let's see what Gus is going to do. He is going to slab Thrilling, read Really Happened, and tear up Exciting. Exciting does have the most offensive cover. I'm sure those are terrible caricatures of Japanese soldiers.
Oh yeah.
But those German ones don't look much better. They look kind of apish.
Yeah.
I noticed that people are still trying to avoid saying that they'd rip a comic. And I must remind people that no actual comics are being ripped up. It's just a game.
Just even in theory, it's just so
it upsets them. That is kind of funny. Now, picture frame. Yep, picture frame.
Yeah, it's an interesting trade dress, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess that was standard comics trade dress in 1944.
Yep. They figured they're on the rack, so you're going to only mainly see the logo.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. With a bright color behind it.
But Thrilling and Exciting had pictures of the main character next to the logo. And notice none of them had branding. Publisher branding, that is.
Oh, yeah. Featuring the Commando Cubs in action. Wonder if they beat the Chicago Cubs. Oh, that's so funny. Let's see. Sleepy Reader is reading Exciting, tearing up Really, and slabbing Thrilling. Okay. Those were some nice comic covers, I got to say.
Mm-hmm. Let me see who drew those covers. So let's go to the Grand Comics database and find
the issue numbers again.
Standard Comics, maybe. Yeah.
I'll bring it up again. Hold on. Let me share.
So who did publish those actual books?
Standard.
Standard, aka Netor, aka Pines, aka Better.
Okay, I heard of Pines.
But they're all the
Pines
same.
did Mighty Mouse for a short while.
Yeah, but they're all the same company.
Thrilling 44. It really happened 2. An exciting 35.
Okay, so Thrilling Comics. It has an Alex Schomburg cover.
Slab. That's Schomburg. Okay. Slab thrilling. Read exciting.
It really happened number.
Oh, it really happens, so it never happens.
It really happened.
It really happened.
Let me check the cover gallery again. So, what is this? Number 2.
It really happened. Number 2.
That has a cover. Also, Alex Schomburg.
Oh wow, those are both Schomburg. He must have been doing a lot of work for Standard that month.
Yeah, and
Did
exciting.
a lot of
Exciting
work
comics,
for
too.
everybody. I don't think they ever actually had the final count, but people think that he has done the most comic covers out of all comic artists.
Yeah, and so he's exciting number 35. So yeah, lots
Those
of
are all
Schomburg.
Schomburgs. Wow.
Mhm.
He was good. He really was. Good stuff. All I didn't even realize I picked all 4 Schomburgs. I've been trying to read Golden Age sci-fi comics lately. Beyond the covers, they're hard to enjoy. Yeah, I imagine you'd have to find the right ones for them to be good. Otherwise, there's a lot of Drek. Anything. I mean, if you were just picking random comics today, it would be tough to find the good ones. I would have to rip it to eat it, so that counts as being in the rules. Don't kick me out. You wouldn't want to eat it whole. Oh, you could make a soup out of it. You know, it would dissolve on its own into the boiling water. But maybe stirring it would rip it.
Maybe you could do a quiche. Maybe you could do a quiche.
A nice, it really happened quiche.
So I have a question about comic collecting that I've only heard about, but I've never was involved in it. Did you trade comics?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've only ever trade only in the sense of I sold stuff in a comic book shop and I traded like a poster to get an Amazing Spider-Man issue. But that was about it.
I've never really actually started my collection in that I don't remember what comics I had before Hulk 200, but I had Hulk 200 and my neighbor had Hulk 201, 202, and 203. And that's when I realized they all had numbers on them and made one big story because they went in a row. So I traded him like 50 comics. I overwhelmed him with comics, so he had no choice but to make the trade for those 3 comics, and I consider that the start of my collection. Before then, I don't. But yeah, we used to there's a few kids in the neighborhood we would trade comics, and I also always tell the story of 1980. So I was around 14, and Teen Titans was hot. So I had just started buying DC comics because I'd never bought them before. And issue 5 or 6 was my first issue. I had been, I had plenty of X-Men that had been and I'd also had duplicates of some of the John Byrne X-Men, stuff around 130, somewhere around there. So I'd heard that some kid had some Teen Titans that he wanted to trade for some X-Men. So I was like, sure. I didn't have no idea who the kid was. Don't know where I heard this in school. Somehow we met on a street corner to trade comics, and we did. But it's that was the kicker to that story was he biked over there, and he had remember those bicycle that came in the back of bicycles to hold things. They were like a claw with a spring that held the claw down onto the metal back of the bicycle. You put your school books in there or whatever. He had the comics in there. So I was I was like, oh, because they're crumpled up under that claw
Right.
thing. I was like, oh, I traded them with them anyway, and I still have those comics. But you can see the claw marks in issue number
Still
2.
in them.
But yeah, we did trade comics.
Oh, okay.
Well, on that note, we should end it for the evening because it's ending time, and Paulo can get to bed.
All right. You guys have a great weekend.
All righty. You too. Everybody out there, have a good night.
Bye, folks.
And
Take
we'll
care.
catch everyone next week.